of September 5th. Could I have a roll call, Carrie?
Yes. Commissioner, Board Member Diedler?
Here.
Board Member Lovell?
Here.
Vice Chair Hanley?
Here.
And Chair Langberg.
Here.
And we did receive notice that Carrie Bush is out sick today, and our alternate, Marcia Boff, will not be here either.
Okay, thank you. There's no minutes to approve, so could we have a update from the planning department?
Yes. So next week on the Planning Commission's agenda, they have an update from SCTA on the active countywide active transportation plan. So if you're interested, please either attend that meeting or watch it via YouTube or Zoom. The other project information that we have, the Canopy project, which is on the north end of town behind the O'Reilly Media Center buildings, is still moving forward. We're hoping to get some of the traffic count stuff this week so that they can move on with their EIR to have hopefully the public draft of that by the end of this year in circulation, so we can have that moving forward. The Woodmark project is still moving forward. I don't have any big updates with that, but if Carrie wants to add on.
So yeah, so we do get a 3-week look ahead construction schedule every Thursday or so for the next 3 weeks from the contractor. And it looks like they'll be starting to work on their retaining walls for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then one other item to note, the subcommittee did hear, the design review guidelines subcommittee did meet to talk about the SB 9 standards. And we are looking at having a joint meeting with the Planning Commission to review that. And that would be November 7th at 6 p.m., which is the Planning Commission's normal meeting time. And so if you could mark that on your calendars, so that'll be a joint Planning Commission Design Review Board meeting.
6 p.m.?
6 p.m., correct, yeah. And then, as John noted, the active transportation plan, that is what bicycle and pedestrian master plans are now called. So just to translate that a little bit for next Tuesday's Planning Commission meeting.
And then I believe the Hotel Sebastopol project is going to be doing some minor site work here pretty soon to get a inspection on record so that they can continue to move forward with that project.
Yeah, they are currently waiting for federal approval of their archaeology plan so they can move forward with their project.
And the purpose of doing a little bit now is?
They're trying to do what they can, so they can't really do site disturbance until the archaeology report has been approved. And so then they're working with Sonoma State University to do, who they're contracting with to do the archaeology.
But I think John mentioned necessity to get started because.
Yeah, again, so they do have a valid building permit, and it's part of their building permit. They need to do a certain amount of work on site. So they are starting what they can for that.
To keep the permit.
The building permit active, yes. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the state building permit code.
I think that's it.
Could we get an update on Huntley? We haven't heard about them in a while.
Yeah, so I reached out to the Huntley folks, I believe it was last week or the week before. They're looking at getting a construction set of drawings within the next month or so to the city. I know that they've run into some issues with current events as far as lending and loaning and all that kind of stuff goes. And so they're hopeful that within the next month or so, they'll have that building permit set drawings to the city to start review. And then Habitat for Humanity is still in plan review with the building department, and planning had some comments, and then they're working on their final map with engineering.
So I have a quick question. Who is the contractor on Woodmark?
So Pacific West, the main firm who owns it is the prime. If you're interested in who any of their subcontractors are, I can find out for you on that.
So they're running the show.
Correct. Yep.
Any other questions for staff? I had heard a rumor of a Caltrans grant that the city
Thank
received.
you. That was, thank you. I don't know why that's not on it. We did receive a sustainable transportation grant. And so this is a grant that we had applied for to look at the traffic in town, particularly downtown, and making sure that we have coordination. Obviously, Caltrans owns both 12 up to Main Street and 116 all throughout town. So we're hoping this will be a way of coordinating with them on that, but also looking at, the various modes of transit and planning for future. And I don't know when that will get started. I did have a conversation last week, right after the award was announced, with our engineering manager, so that we can be poised to get started on that.
Mm-hmm. There's $300,000, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
I think it's like 240 or something. It's
Sizable.
It's sizable. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Does this have anything to do with wanting to go back to two-way street?
The general plan recommendation to review that will likely be part of, and I believe that's part of one of the things that we'll be looking at as part of that project. But it's not just that; it's broader in terms of we know Sebastopol has a lot of pass-through trips, and there's some areas where that presents, safety issues, congestion, and whatnot.
Is someone suggesting an answer to that problem?
Well, that's what the grant is for, is to
Explore that.
explore it. Exactly. Yeah, in terms of the two-way, W-Trans, the city's consultant for most traffic engineering issues, did look at that a while back in terms of just a very preliminary fatal flaw kind of analysis. But this would take it further into actually looking at how it could work, but also other modes of transportation and those types of things.
Is the bypass going to be studied again?
I don't know. So one of the things that you're talking about, the Yano Road bypass?
Like the
Yeah,
one proposed
so-
in 1991, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, the really interesting thing about that is that most of those are outside of city limits, as you know. So they do take coordination with the county. The county is about to update their general plan. And so that was actually one of the things I was talking about with our engineering manager, is that it needs to be not just within city limits, because we're impacted by so many of the roads, and it's, even if it's not a kind of a freeway bypass, which I don't think any of these roads would really be, but are there alternative routes that could be enhanced, like Pleasant Hill, Occidental, Guerneville, so that there are other routes for those who are not stopping in town.
Yeah.
So. But that also needs to make it into the county's transportation plan too, obviously.
So does this involve retaining a consultant?
Yes, it will. This is not something that John, Tony, and I and Mario could do on our own with all of the rest of our jobs. So yeah, we would be looking to actually put out an RFP for that.
So what would be the role of the consultant at this point?
Well, the traffic engineering component of it certainly would be. the city will we be designing a participation plan if there are surveys or data gathering, things like that. Frankly, we haven't put together the request for proposals yet to see what that scope would be versus what we can do in-house. So that's what we'll be working on the next few weeks.
Great, thank you very much. Moving along, comments from the public on items not on the agenda. Anybody out there? Do we have any public people on Zoom?
Yeah, it looks like we have one person from the public. If you'd like to make a comment for something that's not on the agenda today, can you please raise your hand? I'm not seeing anything, and we did not receive anything via email or phone for items not on the agenda.
All right,
Well,
thank you.
we did receive a couple of comments from one of the attendees at the tree board meeting, but those items were not appealed. So.
Thank you. Any statements of conflicts of interest among the board? Seeing none, we can go on to our regular agenda item, the continuation of the objective design standards from our July 25th meeting.
Yes, so as Chair Langberg mentioned, this is a continuation of the objective design standards that was first heard at the DRB's July 25th meeting, where they received a staff report, presentation of the objective design standards, heard public comment, and began deliberations. As a result of that meeting, the board decided to continue this item to a future meeting, noting that there were missing... Noting that there were missing items from the document from the design guideline subcommittee, and also felt additional time for members to review the document would be helpful for a full discussion of this document. Opticos, the project consultant, has revised the document to include those items missed and has submitted a red line version of this, and this special board meeting was scheduled to continue deliberations on the draft document. To note, the Planning Commission did review the revised document and recommended the approval of this document to City Council for adoption. But they did note there were some items that are part of the staff report, I won't read them all out, to include into the final version before that goes to City Council. And that if there were minor modifications to this document from this meeting, they were okay with their recommendations staying in place. However, if there were major modifications, they did want to review the document again before it going to City Council. There are also some notes in the staff report that have an overall start of the considerations that the board discussed at their July 25th meeting. There's quite a few here. I won't go through all of them in detail, but some of them include parking spaces, opacity on screening and architecturally compatible, and other forms of things. So with that, I will conclude my staff report. We do have the project consultants, Tony Perez and Singe Siliki, here to answer any additional questions. We won't be getting a presentation from them as this is just a continuation of this item. So with that, I will conclude my staff report. And lastly, we are recommending the DRB by resolution, recommend this to City Council for adoption.
All right, thank you, John. So we could bring it back to the board and continue our discussion. And I guess then if we have questions for the consultant, we can ring them up.
I have a clarification.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Sorry. So these objective design standards are linked to the SB 35 law. So my understanding is that, and that's linked to the RENA numbers. So if we've met our RENA obligation, then somebody cannot come through with an SB 35.
That is
project.
correct.
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay. So I think that at this point in time, for this round arena, we've have or will be meeting our arena obligations.
Well, we don't know that. It's 213 for an 8-year cycle. We do know the 48 Woodmark has been permitted yet. The permit has been issued. So you only get to count the arena towards arena once a building permit is issued. So there's no guarantee of all of those. We anticipate we may be okay, and we're hopeful we will be meeting those targets, but we don't know for sure. And I don't want to get into a big SB 35 discussion again, because we need to get through this document.
Right, no, understood.
which is-
I understood.
okay.
So I just have simple yes, no questions.
Yep,
So,
okay.
so what is the balance of time that we have left in the current arena cycle?
7.5 years.
7.5 years. Okay.
And they will reassess at halfway through the cycle is when they look for progress.
Something very bizarre is
It's
going
fine.
on.
It's just a Zoom bombing.
Happens.
Infantile people.
Oh, okay. So I have another question, and it may be a question for Tony. So once this document is accepted, who owns the intellectual property? Is it still Opticos's intellectual property, or does it belong to the city of Sebastopol? And where I'm going with this is, if we finish this and they get paid, so contract done, do we have the right to make revisions to this document? Or do they own the intellectual property and we go back to them?
We would have the ability to make revisions and modifications to our design guidelines as we choose.
And that would be considering this document.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, anything adopted by the city by resolution can be modified and then adopted by city council. So those modifications can be adopted.
So basically, in a sense, the city of Sebastopol ends up owning this intellectual property.
Correct. Yeah. And Tony, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, you'll receive files that let you edit the document. The distinction between intellectual property and the copy that you have, that there's a difference. The intellectual property you don't need to own to make edits and revisions as you choose.
Perfect. Which is really what we're interested in, I assume, Christine, is being able to make edits and modify this document as the city sees fit
Exactly.
through time.
Going
And we will
forward
have the
through
ability
time.
to do
Yeah.
that. Yep.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
of the, do you both feel like all of your edits have now been incorporated into this document?
No.
Okay. Because I spoke with Paul Fritz last week and he had a similar feeling
Mhm.
that perhaps all of the edits had not been incorporated.
Do we want to ask Opticos about that? Or are they, Tony, so from our last meeting that we had found there was edits not incorporated and now we have a revision. But do you feel this is a complete revision?
We do. We went through everything with staff. We checked our notes, so we went through everything and made all the edits that we could identify that we missed. I don't know of any that we didn't make that we were supposed to make. If there are, they weren't on our list, so we're happy to take them today.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, let's. Yes, this is the time and place. So I guess we can, unless there's other sort of logistical questions, we could go through any additional comments on the document. I know from last time, Melissa had a few comments, and we sort of, it felt like after you spoke, Melissa, we kind of reached that point where we needed more time. So Lynn, I don't think you really had a chance, and Christine as well. So Lynn, would you like to start with any comments on the document?
Yeah. I'm glad to see how much I'm glad to see how much this document references walkability and the importance of walkability in our community. And there's several things I'd like to add to that I hope to see in the walkability that was emphasized here. But one of them is a little complicated, but it's to provide pass-throughs from one location to another location that would be popular with the residents of one area or the customers from one area to get to another area, like from a store to your parking lot, or like the Woodmark situation, you have all your exits going down to a busy road, bodega, but many of the occupants there will send kids to other schools, particularly Brookhaven, where if they could just walk out to Washington out the back way, they would have a great walking shortcut on quiet roads to the school there. And there's been a number of examples of this not happening. And one was the Pinecrest School. They're putting in a small subdivision on a little branch street off Lynch, I think. And the DRB said, we need a pass-through from the end of that street to the school. Well, the principal of Pinecrest then said, well, I don't think we want that. We don't know who will walk through there or something like that. Well, okay. So that was erased then. That was removed. Now there's Sunrise is the new owner of the school there. And they wanted to pass through, and they have bemoaned the fact that there is none. And there's places like Hop Monk where people walk over curbs and flower planters to get common places. And so I'd like to see something in here that emphasizes the need for walking connections between buildings, parking lots, and places where people want to go that are not roads, but pass-throughs. That is one. Another is in this, it has many very long blocks shown in the diagrams and these standards here. But again, it would be the blocks shown are very long, and I'd like to see some kind of a pass-through or a walkable alley on any block where you have, let's say that it's over 250 feet, that there's a passageway to get to the other side of the street, to the other, the neighborhood that's over there, without having to walk around a busy street where you could shortcut. So, and the other thing is, you know, why would you mandate something where you have come into a private property where they say, no, I don't want people shortcutting across my property. But property owners change, and there are situations where you could have a great pathway, great walkable pathway, if you could talk the new owners or a new owner into letting you cross it. And, or in some cases, like the county of Sonoma has done, is when a house comes up for sale, they've bought the property and created an easement and resold the property. Sometimes with no net cost, if they have volunteer realtors involved. So it's not only possible walkthroughs immediately, but foreseeable ones. And so I hope that concept gets entered into these large housing unit and large scale buildings in particular. Let me just take a little break here and I'll catch up with new ones.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Christine, would you like to take over from here?
Certainly. So my big concern here with this whole process is drip, drip, drip. We're losing control over our local community to the state of California. And this isn't the only example. And I think we need to consider how we feel about that. So we've got SB 35 that comes in as mandated by the state. And these projects are coming in, and my understanding at the beginning of this process was we were to develop design standards themselves so that there would be no review of these SB 35 projects. But this document also sneaks in this concept of form-based code. So it's broader than that. And I'm not objecting to form-based code, but this is a broader task than just objective design standards. And, first of all, just as a general, everybody's throwing around walkable. What is the overarching goal of walkable? I ask my fellow board members. Anybody answer that question?
Can I back you up just real quick to your first statement? Because I agree with you. I think these are overreach. And I would like to propose that we amend the title of this to Article 2, Objective Design Standards for SB 35 eligible projects.
Well, I would love to see that happen.
I think
Yeah.
And I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Only. Because my fear
mine too.
is that, well, I'm going to put this on the record. My fear is that we've got this nice little document and it's just one city council vote. They probably haven't thought through all this stuff. Like, don't even get me started on the RENA numbers. No, but I ask you to understand, all of you, that you cannot understand this without understanding the RENA numbers and the RENA process, period. But, it's one city council vote from this being for everything.
I totally agree.
But in getting back to the walkable, can anybody answer this question? Because I curiously would like to know, what is the overarching goal? Because we talk about walkable all the time and everything must be walkable, and I'm certainly not opposed to walkable. But what is the goal? Like, first of all, I haven't even really been able to get a clear definition of what is walkable, but what is our goal behind walkable?
You mean, why do we want it walkable, or?
Yeah, what is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Because this is the 15-minute city. This is the form-based code. It's all like, one of the main functions of this is walkable. So what are we trying to obtain here by walkable? I mean, what is our overarching goal? If you guys want to wait and think about that, I'll go back.
Yeah, why don't you carry
So-
on? I mean, I think there's different theories behind walkable cities, whether it be like a 20-minute city or a kilometer city or even what have you, and ideas of removing any cost-based transit so that, I mean, in theory, the most democratic form of transit is your own 2 feet. Mobility limitations aside, I think that's probably the driver.
Well, what we have here with this document, and I'm certainly not, opposed to this document as it stands alone as a document. But what I question is, how does this apply to Sebastopol? These goals with this form-based code, we're trying to squeeze that into infill. But I don't see how that works, because you're talking about community planning on a larger basis. Like, how do you get this into here? And how does that help us? I don't think it's possible, to be honest with you. We're largely built out. And it's interesting because I've had the pleasure of investigating and understanding 2 15-minute cities. One of them was in this format with the blocks. And then the other one was actually really quite interesting, and it solved Lynn's problem of pass-throughs, which it was circular. So in the middle was the commercial area per se, with a lake and a park, and you had your commercial buildings, your shopping, your restaurants. Everything was in the middle with the apartments above. And then the street work went around in loops, and then it was transected by spokes, I'm going to call them, that were public property that anybody could walk in from any direction into the center. And it was entirely walkable. And I thought, well, this is a nice way to go about it. With this, we're in the blocks. I mean, that's what this is describing, the blocks. And so I'm concerned about something being so thou must, thou should, thou hast to, and then you see this other idea and it's out the door. Because it's not this. If it becomes generally adopted, not generally adopting is a big, that's a big push through. If it's just SB 35 projects. But how do you stop that? I do like your idea about the title, but. So I feel like we're boxing ourselves in with something that's very authoritarian, to be honest, and that doesn't really apply to our city. That's my concern in a nutshell. And we're working through the weeds on it. But I think there's some really big picture problems. And then when you drill down on the RENA methodology and you see what's coming up for Sebastopol, we should be better prepared. And we have 7.5 years. So why hurry this through? Because Sebastopol is targeted for big RENA numbers, and this document proves it. So I feel like we're being rushed through, approve this document. We're not thinking through the big picture. I'm probably the only one that studied the big picture. I have a lot of information I'd be willing to share. And why rush? And that's why I'm going through this thinking with this idea with if we can accept this document and we can change it, we can take it under consideration as other jurisdictions with this document have done. Because this document is the 12th of these that I've seen by Opticos, and they're all essentially the same. I mean, it's a form, and I understand why you would do that, and then we're squeezing into this form. But what does that have to do with Sebastopol? And Lynn was bringing up very specific situations, like how do we, if we've got something that's so authoritarian and you must do, how do we deal with this? I mean, we're a small town, we all know each other. This is not, even though it's a city, it's not really. So I'll let somebody else take over.
Anybody like to respond to Christine's comments?
I would be happy to respond just as a staff person, but I defer to the board.
Yeah, Lynn, go ahead, and then we can go to staff.
I find them interesting and very relevant, and I am glad someone is looking at the big picture here.
All right. I think it would be good to hear from staff, I think, especially when you talk about, Christine, the timeline, because there are limitations, financial and otherwise. So Carrie, could you address that or anything else if you'd like?
Yes. So we are obviously not under SB 35 right now because we have met our targets from the last round. That will be reassessed, as I said, 4 years in, so 3.5 years from now. However, we are actually getting state funding to do this work. If we don't adopt these by the end of the year, we would be responsible for that funding, which was, I think, about $90,000. So that said, this is a living, breathing document. There is nothing that says we can't adopt a baseline, consider this a baseline with whatever edits the board might talk about, and then continue to talk about over the next 3 or hopefully 7.5 years, how to modify this to be even better. All of our zoning ordinances, design guidelines, they're all living, breathing documents. They are not a one and done, written in stone, 10 commandment kind of a thing. They are all, you learn things. And I mean, even the 2018 zoning ordinance, which was a huge redo, John and I kind of go through it, and almost every day we could find something that needs to be tweaked. And so we're looking at doing some of those modifications. So, oh, that's a loophole, or oh, that's an unintended thing. Why do we even have that, for instance? And we actually got a $250,000 grant to relook at some of our zoning along the commercial corridors that I've talked about previously. Because there are, I mean, we have a Victorian house that needs to go to the planning commission to go from office back to being residential only because of the way our codes are written right now. And so that, it is, I see this very similarly, or we need to start somewhere. And this is a big chunk of work that Opticos has helped us with. We've modified it to customize it. We can continue to do that as we move forward, but we do need to not just put it on a shelf and forget about it for 3.5 or 7 years and then try to pick it up and do it again. I am perfectly fine with the modification to note that this is, for SB 35 projects or SB 35/HAA, Housing Accountability Act, projects that require objective design standards. I have no problem with that because that is and has always been the intent of this document from staff's perspective. So I think I'll stop there because I don't want to cut in time.
Harry, can I offer something, please?
Yes, please go ahead, Tony.
Lars, so we're not attorneys at Opticos, but it's our understanding when working with cities and working with attorneys on objective design standards, SB 35 is not the only situation of why you would need objective standards. It's the Housing Accountability Act. That's any project that looks for relief in processing under the Housing Accountability Act has to be the only thing you can apply are objective standards. So there's a difference. The SB 35 project has certain requirements under the state for how it's processed. And it's correct that if you're in compliance with your RENA numbers, that you are not subject to SB 35. However, even if you're in compliance with the RENA numbers, it's our understanding that an applicant can still choose to use the Housing Accountability Act relief provisions, which one of them is ministerial processing by objective standards.
Yeah, and Tony, we might have slightly different attorneys there. However, as I just said, for SB 35 and Housing Accountability Act, there are, definitely legal ramifications. Even someone can submit under the Housing Accountability Act and still go through discretionary design review. But if it comes to a lawsuit, then people will look at the objective design standards in terms of the, are you not does it apply to these, but as a basis of, hey, is this a reasonable request versus you're holding discretionary design standards in a way that's discriminatory. If it's very similar to what you have in here, I see that as a good basis for defense.
So what would submitting under the Housing Accountability Act look like? And what kind of project gets that?
Any multifamily project can submit under that. Again, and Tony, go ahead. I don't want
to. I just wanted to make sure before the thread gets lost that the option to have a discretionary process, that is correct. But again, in our experience with our understanding, the applicant gets to choose if they want to go discretionary. So for example, in some cities that have a super high expectation about architectural design and they don't want to regulate it very closely, with the applicants that they know, they essentially tell them, hey, look, if you don't want to be regulated by this, you'll have to go through a discretionary process, and we have a good working relationship and we will work with you. You can't do that with every applicant, but some cities want to do that with more applicants that they know. You can't require somebody to do that, but that's a working method that some cities are using. However, the discretionary path is the applicant's choice, not the city's.
And Tony, maybe you can talk about that offline, because again, that's not entirely my understanding of it. But for instance, the City Ventures project on the north side of town did submit under the Housing Accountability Act, but they did that to preserve some of the things that the Housing Accountability Act we're already abiding by. So it's not, to me, you don't have to. And she sort of caught me by surprise when she said she was going to, and John was there too. And I was like, what do you mean by that? Well, she was making sure that the standards weren't going to change underneath them. Well, we already review based on what was in effect when you submitted, that the development fees weren't going to change out from underneath them. again, that's state law under the Housing Accountability Act, so we're already implementing those. So she had submitted under those, and they will be going through discretionary design review with you. So it's, it's a complex law, and it's probably something that I need to talk with our attorneys more about, but to date, I mean, that's how we've handled it as a city. We're compliant with the Housing Accountability Act. If the state were to get to a place where they were going to allow more non-discretionary review, then these could cover those cases as well. And that's what I'm suggesting, SB 30. And if we have projects that require objective design standards, that we have a set of objective design standards in place so that we don't lose control over those projects. That's the whole point of this document.
So currently, so even though we've met our numbers, so in 7.5 years, a project could require those standards for under the SB 35. But you're saying even before that, any project could have this other end around. so to speak.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some clarification that is needed for that. But if under the Housing Accountability Act, you cannot deny a project, a housing project, under most circumstances. Like you can't deny it based on density if they meet the density. You can't say there's too many units if it is underneath what you allow for your density for your zoning. There are communities that try to do that, and that's where, and you also can't put conditions on a project that would in effect modify those. And you can't say, well, your height limit needs to be blank, and your FAR and all these things that would in effect limit the density or result in reducing the density. So there's a lot of state laws that require those types of things, and cities have been sued underneath those. Sausalito was sued a few years ago for approving a project with certain conditions, and those conditions were the lawsuit claim. I don't actually recall how I think they ended up modifying conditions and coming to a settlement, but the conditions were so onerous that it in effect violated the Housing Accountability Act. So that's kind of where, if you have objective standards, you can kind of point to these things and say, no, yeah, doesn't matter. You're going through discretionary because you are doing a discretionary design, but we're treating you fairly compared to the other things.
But Tony mentioned that it's up to the applicant to do discretion. So if we're not talking about SB 35, but we're talking about HAA, then how would the process?
Yeah, and that's where I need to talk with our attorney
Okay.
about that, because that's not my understanding of it. And I'm happy to clarify that and bring that information back to you all.
All right, thank you.
So if we were to amend the title of this document for projects subject to the Housing Accountability Act, it's my understanding now that also would encapsulate all SB 35. So we would be in.
Correct, for ministerial
Sweet.
design review or something like that. That way it's, super clear that it's only for those specific projects.
Love it. Thank you.
So Christine, based on sort of what, timeline, financial side of things we just heard about, and then Melissa's suggestion about renaming the title, like, are you comfortable sort of moving ahead or talking about it more specifically, or do you still want to have a discussion kind of bigger picture?
Well, I think what I initially said, which is we are losing control of our local jurisdiction and life to the state of California. I think this little discussion was right on point for that. It's obvious. This is happening. And this is not a discussion for today, but we might want to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? But on the topic of these objective design standards, going back to this other walkable community that I saw, they also had an architectural design that was distinctively different from what would be allowed in these. It wouldn't be allowed. If we adopt these, we couldn't adopt what they were doing. It was delightful, really nice architecture. So it bothers me to have such, authoritarian and onerous documentation on what we can do and what we can't do. And I don't know how to get around that, but I'm just putting that out there.
Mhm.
But it could be allowed, it just would be a discretionary process, not a by right process.
Right, but this is what's going to come in. I mean,
Well, and I think that's the point of making sure that it is only for the ministerial review projects.
Well, so that's one part of the point, but the other is that we've taken time or spending money to create these standards. We should create standards that the city would like to have, right? So if we've tried to do that with the consultant, we've gone through a couple rounds of comments and such, but to your question earlier, Melissa, I had some comments about that to make, as we've been saying, to make these standards more modern, and they're still not in there, and that the eave overhang is a minimum of 1 foot. There's some of the best architecture in our town is by Steve Sheldon, who has 0 overhangs on the building, so those would not be allowed, right? So there's still some things missing specifically, but then I think we've also been talking about what the presentation of this to the world when it's done should have photographs and that are not just your cutesy little craftsman bungalow, but have modern buildings in them. And I'd love to send those photos to you, but I don't have time. Like, I keep thinking that I want to do it and I don't have time to do that. So I'll try and put one of my staff on it maybe, but it just feels like that's part of what we're reacting to here is the presentation of this out to the world is going to come back with buildings that are not necessarily what we want to see.
may I add to that, please?
Yes.
So the time thing is a big issue to me because we are all busy professional people and volunteers. And this is a huge task, and I think it must be taken really seriously. And frankly, how do I find the time? I mean, I would mark this up a lot more. I would add photographs. This place that I saw that I was just telling you about, the circular walkable community, you would have loved the architecture. It's completely modern, beautiful, no overhangs. But I don't want to get in a situation where I feel like this is being forced down our throat. And again, this is not like, oh, we got the money, we got the grant, we got this time pressure, exactly like what happened with the parklets. We all objected to the parklets, but we already spent the money, so we're going to approve it. And that's what happened.
The parklet ordinance.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is again, this overarching kind of coming down on us. And I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want to make the decision. I feel if I'm going to make a decision about something, I'm going to review it thoroughly. Where do I find the time to do that? I mean, I can't even tell you the countless hours I've already put in. And I understand this, and I'm grateful that I understand what I understand right now. I can see what's happening on the big picture, but it's just too rushed. That's my feeling about it.
Well, I think to Carrie's point earlier, I think it's we want to get it to a point where we're comfortable adopting it, even if it's not perfect, right? And then we can keep working on it. We can, however that would go with our schedule and process. But we could schedule, every 6 months or something, we have a meeting where all it is discussing further standards or further more about the document.
And what will the process be to update this document? Does it have to, the revisions have to go before council?
So, yeah, so normally this is adopted by resolution by council, so it's not an ordinance. It's a much easier way of adopting it. It's does not require public notice, but does require an official city council agenda item. We may be able to write certain things into it, like modifications of images and diagrams that don't affect the, substantive, but affect the presentation of it. Because those are, they're examples. It's just an updating, and that would allow that presentation component of it to be updated much more easily just by staff or the design review board working with staff on that.
And would it need to be approved by both planning and DRB before going back to?
I don't think so. I think, we did that because of the design guidelines subcommittee and the way it was originally set up by council with representative from all three bodies, now just the two. But normally when design guidelines are revised by the body, it would be the design review board.
Okay.
And of course, any members of the planning commission can comment and attend these meetings as member of the public.
We would love to see them.
All right, Len, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Or either from your notes or from the discussion?
Well, the things I have to add are of a minuscule value relative to the big discussion here. But I'll bring up a couple little things here. There's a sign ordinance in here, and the sign ordinance has a limitation on it. Sign fronting your building can only have the name of the business and the address. And I think something is missing there, that the purpose for a business is important. If it's Apple Cobbler, if they put bootmaker on there, it's appropriate. If there's a business called Beautiful Jane's, not jeans, Jane's, and it says hairstyling along with it, that's appropriate. And so I would make that change. That, and I'm glad that phone numbers and email addresses are not permitted.
It's interesting because the samples actually show like Sweet Magnolia's Bake Shop. Like the examples in this actually show exactly what you're describing, like a tagline of some description. So
Yeah,
I think that needs to be clarified. I agree with you.
that's true, but it also verbally says this is what you can put on there.
That's conflicting. Yeah.
Okay, just another little thing is I would add to the ordinance that any sign that's over 3 feet that gets mounted as a single sign has to have a frame around it. And you have a lot of businesses need a sign real quick, and they put up something that looks quick, that stays there for years and years. And that before your sign goes up, I think it should be finished and look finished.
Is there a way to frame that without calling it a frame? I mean, I'm thinking about signs that are on standoffs that are intended to be frameless and are quite permanent and look finished and beautiful. But, the framing, is it about materiality or permanence, or like you want to get away from like the vinyl signs, right?
Just the flat plywood vinyl signs is what you tend to see. But yes, when something is mounted nicely between a couple posts with some attractive hardware, there are situations where the frame is not appropriate, and hopefully you can get a waiver, or you're looking for a simple standard and not getting into too many details. I don't know how to handle that one.
So I think usually when you regulate signs, you want it to be based on size, material, finish, installation. We do have no vinyl or plastic, so that eliminates, so you do it based on materiality, so you don't get into First Amendment issues, and there may actually be a little bit of an issue with the tenant's names, logo, address, description applied to the awning, but you can regulate the material, and that would be the way to do that.
The, that material can be, I think that's a separate issue, that the sign has to be complete and not just a flat piece of wood that, and there are other ways to make it complete without just a frame on it. So
Can I ask a question on the comment on the signs, please?
Sure.
So, Lynn, I think I looked through the sign chapter right now, and I don't find any limitation to what the sign can have on it, except for the directory sign, which is a directory of businesses, and that's the one that says shall include the names of the businesses and the business addresses, but not include any other words. Is there another sign or another area that you're finding a limitation on content?
I did see something under the awning, Tony. I believe it says shall be limited to stored name.
Yeah, again, the idea on the awning and on the directory sign is because of the size of where the signage is going. There's a limitation, but to my knowledge, there's not an intent or a standard limiting the content of what's.
yeah, there is a statement in here. Only the tenant's store name, logo, and address shall be applied to the awning.
Yeah, again, on the signage, on the awning and on the directory sign, because they're limited in space where that signage can go. That's why that's said that way. If you'd like to not limit it that way, that can certainly be done. I'm just trying to make a distinction that it's not a chapter-wide limitation on content as it might have been being discussed earlier. It's a limitation on content of those two specific types of signs.
That makes sense. Okay.
Mhm.
So are you okay with it as it's written, just for the awning is more limited?
It is not a biggie. I'm not going to push it at all.
Okay. Any other comments? Nope. Okay. Back to the other end of the board there. Christine, do you have any other more specific comments for the document?
Well, I think, first of all, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate having Lynn on the board, because he's a local guy to the maximum. And he's been around for a long time, and he cares about his town. So, Lynn, I appreciate that. So, but this point that Lynn was just making is exactly the point that I'm trying to make, is we've got this form that's presented to us, and we're going through the form, and we're in the weeds, and we're trying to, figure out, what do we want this? We don't want this. We're working on this. We're not working on this. The last time I was sat in this seat, I found two things that were determined to be out completely, but they were in. So this thing needs a lot of review and proofreading, obviously, and I don't think we're there.
Well, so we heard from the consultant, from Tony, that as far as he knows and talking to staff, all the comments were picked up. So I guess we can still, if you have other comments, or we as a board do, we can compile those and submit them to be put into the document. It seems like an easy step.
Just finding the time to do it.
I hear you.
Again, I get back to the rush.
So the schedule again, Carrie, is, you were saying by the end of the year, this has to be adopted, or?
Correct. Yeah. So the deadline for completing this project is the end of this year. I prefer not to leave it to the last meeting in December, because that's obviously a little bit of an issue if something gets bumped, or if there's a different emergency. I certainly have had many items get bumped by council. We can, well, I do want to make sure we do start to discuss the specifics. I think Melissa had a whole bunch at the last meeting. Those are in the staff report, but they still need discussion. Vice Chair Fritz at the Planning Commission also brought up some items that need discussion. So I think we can take more meetings, but I'm concerned that if we just keep going around and around, we don't actually go through the document, we're still not going to get there by the end of this year. So, we can certainly have additional meetings. And I know Opticos's time is limited, but we can do it with just us if that's what's needed to get this done. And if there are questions, John and I can coordinate with Tony and Singe. And, I would be comfortable delaying it until like the first meeting in December, but not much longer than that. I'd
So-
prefer the first meeting in November if we can do that. That gives us 2 months.
So what happens if we don't do it by the end of the year?
Like I said, the grant funding is a reimbursement grant, and if we don't have it adopted, we don't get reimbursed.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand that. So then
Oh,
the
this-
city would be paying Opticos out of their own
Correct.
bucket.
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure completely I understood this correctly. If we do not adopt this document by the end of the year, we lose all of the grant funding.
For this objective design standard.
The
project.
$90,000.
Yes. Yes. It's a reimbursement grant, and the requirement from the state is that if you use the grant funding, then you actually have to implement what they gave you the funding for. And the deadline for that is December 31st. So one of the projects we used the grant for was the e-permitting. The e-permitting is up and running. This is the other project. And then with the different grant, we're also doing with the Planning Commission, vehicle mile traveled standards. That's a different timeline, but it's still a state grant with the same requirement that they don't reimburse you unless you've actually adopted the project.
Okay, thank you. That's pretty clear.
Shocking, but
That's the nature, that's the grant. So, okay, well then, so it seems based on that, our charge of the board is to approve this document before the end of the year, unless to not do that seems irresponsible. So we can keep editing it, we can keep working on it. And so Carrie's suggestion is we go through some of the specific things that are in the staff report. We could discuss those unless there's other, people have other line item things to discuss. So there's a handful in the staff report coming from the Planning Commission about setbacks, screening, lighting, etc. Does anybody have any comments on those?
I thought they were all good comments.
Okay, and if I may, do you want me to walk through those since John and I were at the commission? Just very brief, because there were a couple of things they asked this board to discuss and
yeah.
make decisions
That'd be
on.
I would
great,
appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first couple of comments on page 1 of the staff report were, the one was just to make sure that the underlying zoning was referred to just as a navigational thing for the reader. For site screening, and this was fairly similar to what we've heard from DRB and the design subcommittee and other things, is that the fencing as a screening is good, but shouldn't need to be an exact match to the building material. So that was, right now it says match. So that would be to modify that. That's page 48. And I'm seeing nods, so it may not need to be discussed. The third item was something, and this is on page 50, where they did ask the board to deliberate, which was the issue of exterior lighting. Right now, it says, and this is one where the Planning Commission felt it could just be removed from the document, but they did want you guys to weigh in on that. Currently, it requires that all non-essential exterior lighting associated, so this is kind of signage stuff, not for safety, associated with non-residential uses, i.e. commercial uses, shall be turned off within half hour after the close of business, or when the non-residential use is not in use in all areas except downtown, excuse my typo, exterior lighting in downtown, so everywhere except for downtown, lighting that isn't essential for businesses turned off half hour after close of business, and for downtown, turned off by 3 a.m. There are some businesses who leave their lights on, so sort of a showroom, window shopping into the evening. And the thought was by 3 a.m. for sustainability reasons, those probably could be closed down at 3 a.m. And then a half hour in other locations. So that was one. And so I don't know if the board wants to talk about that.
I'd like to comment on the 3 a.m. thing. Some people may leave their lights on for safety and anti-crime reasons.
Just about to ask.
And
yeah.
3 a.m., if they're on till 3 a.m., they might as well be on all night. But that's like kind of your crime zone, 3 a.m. till dawn. So I think that there would be considerations for that in certain situations.
Yeah, one of our commissioners is a business owner in downtown, and she noted that some of it is for that, but some of it is just the highlighting of, of goods and wares, and this is actually exterior lighting. So this is lighting that you might have like on your sign, which isn't really about safety. It's
Well, I
about
think
just your sign.
Like my business, I have lights at my vestibule in my building because people sleep in it otherwise. And those are on all night long. And so
That's a perfect example.
I couldn't hear that.
at which granted is in San Francisco. So, but I have an exterior vestibule, which is a lovely place to sleep if you're looking for some place to sleep. And so we have security lights that are on all night so that it dissuades people from sleeping in the vestibule. And that would be precluded unless that was considered an essential light. And so I think that debate of essential light is kind of where we'd want to define.
Yeah, and it may be, I mean, frankly, the easiest way to deal with it is just to strike it, because then there's not a lot of interpreting this versus that. And it's probably one of those lesser design issues, I would say,
Probably another thing that's
that the
driving-
city has to deal with.
I'm fine with just striking. What do you think? Sorry, Lynn.
There's all kinds of electronic systems that can really be effective at deterring people from bothering a store. And, there's motion detectors with very bright lights. You can get a red light blinking that says, hey, someone knows you're here, kind of thing, that they work. And
Right, and I don't think, this isn't about essential lighting like for security. And actually, I'm curious, Tony and Singe, why the 3 a.m., why that's written that way? If you have some enlightenment.
At the moment, I don't remember why 3 a.m. was picked. I'm sure there was some science behind it. I don't remember it at the moment.
Okay.
That was a discussion at the DGS meetings. There was a discussion about when most businesses close in Sebastopol. And I believe it was stated that most businesses close by 2. And so if you allow an extra hour for the workers to leave, then there's 3 a.m. was the time that was
most businesses in
given to
Sebastopol
us.
probably close by 6 p.m. Singe. So I think the latest business closures we probably have in Sebastopol is 2, because we do have a couple bars that close at 2. And so that may have been based on the latest hour.
Yeah, latest is not most.
I'm okay to strike. Is anyone offended by
Well,
striking?
yeah, I'm ready to strike half this document right now.
Well, let's limit it to just item 5. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That sounds good.
And then Carrie, last time we discussed, there's no reference to the dark sky standards in this required lighting. Did we want to add a reference to that?
I believe it is so we don't have a dark sky standard.
Oh,
We do not have a dark sky ordinance. I'd love to find the time to work on that, but
that's
that's-
craziness.
yeah. We do have design guidelines, and our general plan talks about it as well. So in our design guidelines, we require it. And then I believe all of the lighting in this document does require it as well, if you actually go to the lighting standards.
As I'm reading the lighting standards, and I haven't seen a reference, and perhaps I've missed it, forgive me, to any reference to a dark sky standard or that the lighting actually comply with that.
Yeah, and not specifically just downcast and
Yeah.
preventing overlighting, etc.
Sorry, I am on the wrong page.
It's a page 50. Has the landscaping and lighting.
I'm sure I'm not.
Yeah, so to prevent overlighting and light trespass and full cut off luminaries, that is basically dark sky compliant. So without saying the words, we're basically telling them,
Yeah.
you have to do this, and that is dark sky compliant.
You feel happy with that then?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the bollard lightings are light downward, so they're not like beacons up into the light.
Sure.
Yeah, so we basically wrote the standards to be that. And if it does help to, I mean, we can certainly say dark sky compliant as follows.
I think-
Lighting shall be provided in compliance with dark sky standards.
I think that's a good
With
thing
the
because
following.
a lot of light manufacturers actually sell their product based on dark sky standards and list product specifications as being compliant with dark sky standards. So it gives designers more like, okay, if this is
That's what we
compliant.
mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's an easy keyword to add. Okay, and then page 66, the public frontage standards. This is just removing, we don't have a lot of places in town or any where we have a planter strip in between the street and the sidewalk. So they just wanted that removed since it's for the building types, they felt that both the up-down duplex, so flats, and the side-by-side should be allowed in the T3 zone. The T3 is the R5 zoning, which is the single-family and duplex. Currently, the up-down duplex is under the multiplex medium definition. And so they wanted to check in since that was not something that came up otherwise. So right now, the multiplex medium, which is the up-down duplex, they basically felt that should be added to the being allowed in the R5 zone. And I don't see any reason why it couldn't be. It's just an additional flexibility if they're. Okay.
Okay.
We'll change that to be P. And then I think this is one that actually came up with you all anyway, which was the horizontally configured windows, that horizontal windows be allowed.
And trimless. Why so much trim? Save a tree. Stop with the trim.
And then the other item was, and this was actually something that was raised by staff, that right now, and this is something that came up with Woodmark, the number of heritage trees under an objective standard before a project would need to come to discretionary review. And so this is specifically the specific number or percentage of heritage trees that would be allowed to be removed before triggering discretionary review. And the design guidelines subcommittee did not set, and actually Carrie Bush was going to come with information. So unfortunately, he's not here today. But one of the things that I was thinking about was either 2 trees or 10%, which is less.
Of heritage trees.
Of heritage
so
trees.
Of a certain size or
Correct, which
stature or-
for multifamily is 10 inches for single family. So this is, and actually Woodmark was a single family site, so it was based on the existing use, 20 inches. And so I think Woodmark had, I want to say 8 or 9. And then they had a number of trees, obviously, that were not heritage trees.
Well, based on our last meeting, the number is 0, I would say. I mean, I'm half joking, like to say, what if there's, they're taking out one tree that's, 50 inch in diameter or something, we would want to stop that, I would think. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and this
heritage
is-
trees are pretty important to our world and our community. So if they're going to take out heritage trees, versus any trees, they go to discretionary review.
Amen.
Amen, amen.
And I will note that, I mean, as we talked about earlier, the Housing Accountability Act, if it was required, if you did not allow it, and it would require them to reduce their density beyond what they were allowed by
But
zoning
we're
because of
we're
that
not
tree.
saying that. We're saying you have to go to discretionary review, where we could
Correct.
then rule, okay, that one tree can go away because it's providing great housing. But to make it a standard that's 10% or 10 trees or whatever, we have no control.
That's true. Yep.
Carrie, you're feeling, I mean, 1 tree or 10% is pretty minimal trees. And that's not onerous, but 0 is onerous. Like one,
Yeah, I think it goes to what Tony had sort of provided guidance of before, of you don't necessarily, you want people to, within reason, if they're doing the objective design standards, utilize these, which are kind of the priorities of the town,
yeah.
so to speak. I mean, we're certainly, there are things that we'd rather people do than not. Versus go to the density bonus way where you basically have that even less control,
Yeah.
right?
I'm worried that from the legal argument that 1 tree is still considered onerous and that.
Right, but would you want someone doing a density bonus application, doing a 10-story building because they can't take out the tree?
I'm 100% on board. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to protect this here. Like,
Yeah,
and I agree with my fellow members here that, 0 is the number for heritage tree. I think it's a great distinction because it is important to our town as we've experienced.
Yeah, and I guess, and maybe there's a different way of looking at it, which is there are heritage trees that are about to fall down
Yeah.
and dangerous. So would it be heritage trees deemed by the city by an arborist to be in good to excellent health?
I like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
there's certainly plenty of Monterey pines out there that
Yeah.
could come down.
Well, and I mean, the Healdsburg Murphy site had a couple of trees that just fell down on their own. And to say, I mean, they were heritage trees, so if they weren't able to comply, but it was going to be obviously a huge safety issue, then yeah.
That makes sense.
What we don't want is people clear cutting a site because it's easier for them.
How does everyone feel about that designation? Are we happy with that mod?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
But I think we're happy with that with the mod.
And to clarify, that was no trees or 1 tree? No trees in the deemed good or excellent health. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
That works. Yep.
And Tony and Singy, staff will probably write that for you, that bit of language, so that we can sort of coordinate it with our code as needed.
Okay, thank you.
So then on the staff report, we have a list of comments from our July meeting, I guess, that were not put into the revision because we were never finished the discussion, essentially, right? Okay. Anybody have any comments of those? I guess we could go one by one through those as well. Okay. Okay. Consider moving the administration section to the front, better guide for users than at the end. I'm all for that. Sounds good to me.
Can you speak a little more clearly? Kind of mumble.
The first one on the list, which is on your staff report, consider moving the administration section to the front of the document. Now it's at the end. I guess that's
Yeah, and I believe Melissa's comment on that was that the administration helps you understand what sections and how to use the documents. So let's put that up front, which I have no
Yeah.
problem with.
that works. Yep.
Completely
Okay.
agree.
Okay. I guess we can, yeah, if people have any objections or discussions, I go through the list, just
Right.
speak up. Additional definitions for compatible. This is used throughout, but needs an objective standard / definition. What makes compatible? What makes something compatible?
I mean, I think that's the crux of the whole issue, right? Like, we need,
Yeah, it is difficult because you don't want match because
Yeah.
of the design review board's concerns, and others are like, well, if you have a fence, do you really want it to have to match the house or the structure versus being compatible? And what is that? And so Tony and Singa, I don't know, you've been writing objective standards far longer than we've been thinking about them. Do you have definitions of that would help? Say if someone challenged and said, it's compatible.
Yeah, no, that's a word that gets replaced with something more specific. Yeah, we don't see that word being used for the very reasons you're stating.
it's all over your document.
I'm talking about a definition. If you're asking about a definition, I haven't seen one. It has to be written specifically for what you're writing it about. So if you want to talk about a specific instance that we can, what happens best is if you clarify it in that particular topic as opposed to trying to write a definition that works for everything. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think that needs to happen because there's a lot of discretion in that word alone. That's going to be a lot of argument down the road. I have been the person who has argued that in other jurisdictions.
Well, it seems somewhat subjective also.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the concern, is that that's not an objective word. Yeah.
So what do we do about it? It's all over the document.
Boy, you could write a book on it.
This is a book. So Tony, can you offer any guidance on that one? I mean, how have other communities dealt with this?
I'm trying to find where the first reference is so that I can give you an answer. So if you can give me one, we can use it as an example.
I'll find my notes.
Because it depends.
So the first occurrence is on page 2. Item 2, subsection B.
For that, I would say would have appropriate transitions. And again, this is a guiding principle. What does that mean? An appropriate transition would be later, and that's the step backs and those types of things. But that's how I would change that particular
And I
one.
think if we can tie it to other things, that's like in keeping with section 2 point whatever, or, just so that we're keeping it circular within the document, we're not having to look to anything outside the document for instruction.
Can you point to one that's in the standards so we could maybe give an example of that?
Sure.
I'm also looking, I don't have the search command on my laptop right now, or my iPad.
Tony and Kari, with permission, I can make a suggestion.
Yeah,
So section 4.020, which is screening.
Do you have a page number by chance on that?
Yeah, it's page 49. That's subsection 5, number 2, wall and ground mounted equipment. I believe this is the only instance in document where the word compatible is used in a standard. And that standard actually provides an understanding of what that actually means. So in that case, it's asking for screening to be architecturally compatible, which equates to matching paint, finish, and trim cap of the building. And that's everywhere else the word
Where is this on
compatible.
page 49?
Yeah, page 49. Everywhere else in the document where compatible is used in an intent statement. And so to the previous conversation, it may need to be directly tied to the standards which are in the following chapter. But the only place that someone would need to make a finding around compatibility would be the statement under screening for wall and ground mounted equipment.
Well, that's an interesting example that to say something's architecturally compatible has a lot of meanings, but then it goes on to say matching paint, finish, and trim cap of the building, which is it's architecturally matching, not, I mean, compatible feels more open-ended, and you could design a pretty interesting screen that goes with the design of the building that doesn't match so specifically.
And I think this was comments from last time. We had issues with this, and Paul had issues with this as well.
Mhm.
So I guess our ask is that Opticos review instances of compatible, and if it's in an intent statement, that it be followed up with a reference to a section, chapter and verse, or to come, to be defined, to be further explained.
Okay, I just want to clarify that this reference on page 49 is the only time the word compatible appears in the actual standards. Your direction is duly noted. We will do that, but I just want to clarify that we're not using the word compatible in the standards other than what Stefan just identified.
Okay. So if the board has other instances they've seen, we can bring that up. But continuing along, images in general should show better variety, including less new urbanism / traditional images, which we've talked about that. Remove text stating form-based codes foster predictable built results. This is not necessarily what the city wants to encourage. So that must be in the early sections
Yeah,
of the
that
document.
is in that same kind of section.
Page 4.
Page 4, what is a form-based code? And it's from a quote from Form-Based Codes Institute.
So deleting the quotations, really. I mean, the rest of it kind of explains.
This gets to a point that I made earlier, and I'm not objecting to the idea of form-based code, but when you have a largely built-out city, how do you, why are we even doing this? What's form-based code? I mean, you pretty have to demo to,
Well, I think it's the understanding that change happens, buildings don't last forever, and how do you transition? And how do you want to transition? Like, it's like if you just matched everything, you would have a lot. I mean, the 60s era bodega buildings, apartment buildings on Bodega, we talked about this as a group. They're not necessarily what we want in the future. What is it that we want in the future? And this is kind of that planning for it. Now, you know, whether we talk about form-based code or not, or just have this be the city standards, I'm fine deleting the whole form-based code explanation and section and just having these be objective design standards and not talk about form-based codes at all.
I think that that's the objective of this exercise, is to just have it be design standards.
Yeah,
We're not talking about city planning here. And like I said, I don't object to the idea in principle. I'm just wondering, because the thing is, what we need to try to create is a user-friendly document. And I think we need to cut this down if we're going to get there.
So so the question is there value in having definitions and discussion of form-based code in the document or not?
Well, that's a separate topic. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I don't object to it. I'm just saying, what's it doing in here? These are objective design standards.
Mm-hmm.
And this form-based code that's described in here, like I gave an example of a completely different way to approach this ultimate overreaching goal of walkable, right? It's not just one way to do it. I hate to, have this be a mandate, which is basically what this document is.
If it helps, I could give a little background on what other cities have done about this very question. We are working in cities the size of Sebastopol to the size of Columbus, Ohio. and everything in between. And it's a toss-up between some cities saying we want everyone to know we're doing a form-based code, and others like Columbus, Ohio saying, no, we want form-based standards, but we don't need to tell everybody it's a form-based code. And so we don't. And that code that we're writing right now is not going to say that it's a form-based code, but it's going to be that type of code. The other thing about a form-based code versus the other ways of doing zoning standards is that when you talk to cities and people in the process, all across the type of process, from reviewing projects to designing and implementing projects, the majority of people, when they're given the situation of how can you get to a faster yes, they point to a form-based code because of its clarity. You see all kinds of different answers in between there, but the majority of applicants and project designers and city reviewers, once they get to that question, they tend to prefer form-based codes. Not everybody, obviously, but I'm just saying it's usually 2/3 of people that you talk to that would say, yeah, we want this type of standard. And so when you write objective standards, the most clear way to write them is with the diagrams and the form-based approach that you see here. Is ours the only way? No, there are other ways too. I'm just relaying that experience.
Okay, I appreciate that, Tony, and you said a bunch of things that, I can't verify. But what I'm asking is what does this have to do with objective design standards? Like, if you're coming in with a project, an SB 35 project, let's just say, so you're going to build a bunch of apartments, which would presumably be an SB 35 project, right? How do we make this so that it's easily understood? I mean, like, where does the form-based code on a lot with the apartments, how does that apply? It seems to be more universal, like a neighborhood kind of a.
So Christine, I think the way, and it may be that the text of how, Section 1, Section 2, the Natural to Urban Transect, they're using transects as a sort of a way of, if you recall back, they did the analysis of the existing analysis, right? If you go back to that, as a way of understanding and breaking down the zoning that we have to be a little bit, to group it differently based on kind of the density and what's happening. And so that we have the T3, which is the R5, and the and some of our single family would probably also fall into that, our R4 and R3, and then, R3 and R2, maybe they're in rural, I don't know. But the T4, our Main Street small, or R6, R7 multifamily, and our commercial areas are kind of the same, but they do have slightly different nuances. Downtown, we do treat that differently in our zoning, and it's treated differently here as well. So it's kind of a parallel to zoning, but based on form. And so I think that part is relevant to Sebastopol, the T, and trust me, I mean, you've all heard my frustration with T and whatever, just put the zoning next to it, please, because that's what we're used to saying. But at the same time, I do understand what they're doing in terms of the, what are the kind of the forms that you're seeing. And I mean, we see a lot of the same forms in our office commercial as we do in our multifamily residential along Bodega in terms of the height and the scale and those types of things. So they're looking at it from that kind of a perspective, which is leading to them to these objective design standards. So what maybe I would suggest is that we take out the form-based code, Section 1 and Section 2. We can maybe modify the Section 2 where it has the chart for American communities, which is really kind of their classification that leads to basically page 10, where they talk about the districts. And maybe it's not even form-based districts, maybe it's just design districts.
Do we even have any natural, though, in the city limits?
I would say not in the city limits. We probably do, I mean, like the Laguna.
Yeah.
Which is actually in the city limits. So yes, we do actually, since part of the Laguna is in city limits.
None of those have been identified on the map, which still is missing. It was added as a supplement.
So, yeah, so this is only dealing with multifamily and commercial. They didn't analyze single family. I mean, they analyzed single family, but for the SB9 standards. Objective design standards do not apply to anything but the commercial mixed use and the multifamily.
I guess why would we include anything on the natural context when it doesn't apply to these projects?
Right, and that's what I'm saying. We can probably take out, and Tony, it sounds like other communities have done this as well, where they don't talk about the form-based code. They just use, I'm guessing they still use the transects or the groupings that you've done, if you will.
Yeah, so the reason the natural is in there is just simply to account for it. We're not proposing any standards for it. It's just to account for it. But that can, if it's causing issues, it can be removed. And further, again, as an example of what some cities do, that whole preamble is not even included in some of the codes we write. Some of the cities just say we don't want the preamble for a variety of reasons, and so they remove it. So that's an option available to you. The other option we make available to you, if it's not obvious, is that the names of the zones are the way that Carrie was saying. The names of the zones that we propose are tied to some physical organization that we see in a city, and so we show how we apply that system. If that is not to your liking, we can change the names of the zones to be whatever Sebastopol needs them to be.
Well, I think the first item about what should be included and not included, on page 9, we have contexts that are and transects that are not applicable. So I think we should be consistent. If T1 is not applicable, it's not applicable. Perhaps T2 is also not applicable. And I think it's a very confusing thing to bring in a new layer of zone notation that is not consistent with the zoning elsewhere. And I would strongly encourage that we stick with one nomenclature. So
Yeah, it's a little difficult because the design districts, I'll call them, so we get away from that form word, the design districts for these standards overlap. So R6 and R7, other than some density and that gets into the type of building that's allowed and those types of things, it's the same. So how do you do that with, unless you have an R6-T4 and
well, then I guess this becomes like an overlay.
it essentially is an overlay of the design districts is what it is. Yeah.
Which only becomes clear until you get to section, whenever the admin section is at the very end of the document. So half my comments
which
in
is
the
why you
beginning
move it up
are
front.
like,
Yeah.
what is this? Like,
So it sounds like for what I'm hearing for usability is to eliminate the stuff that's not relevant, the T1, T2. We have the T3 and the T4, and those are maybe, with the map, we can certainly, yes, it is basically an overlay, is essentially what it is. It's a design district overlay, maybe what I'd call it.
I would just recommend removing the entire preamble. It seems to be causing enough issues that making more revisions to it would just leave some others. So again, we've seen several cities, half the cities we work for don't include the preamble and all that information that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's probably fine. I think, Tony, what would be helpful is to, like, the Main Street medium, the Main Street small, where that's, that is explained later on. And so that's correlating that to our zoning and that map are probably the only things that are needed.
I have a quick general question about form-based code. Does form-based code always require infill, or are any of these projects annexing new land or these cities, urban environments to create something? Or because it talks about in here somewhere, I don't know where exactly, so I can't give you a page number, the objective of infill.
So form-based codes are just like Euclidean zoning, performance zoning, all other kinds of zoning that are used for greenfield and infill. I think there's a lot of publicity on big new projects that are greenfield that use a form-based code, but it's increasingly being used in infill in the either regeneration or redevelopment of existing properties like brownfields, gray fields, or infill in existing neighborhoods like areas in Detroit where they tore down houses and now they have a lot of empty lots on blocks. And there are a couple of form-based codes in Detroit working to provide the development that people are looking for there. So they're used all across the spectrum.
Detroit seems like a perfect place for this because they lost all that housing. You come back in, you got a big open area, and you could really implement it correctly
Yeah.
rather than trying to squeeze and fit it around things that are already existing. That would be interesting to see.
Well, we have sites in downtown that we hope will be, redeveloped at some point, and there's gaps in our town too.
Yep.
Those lots are kind of smallish still unless you combined to really get the streets in. And
Okay, so continuing on our list here, page 14-12, remove items which do not require city review, so this does not create confusion.
So I think this is maybe more of a general note. So items, and actually I think my first note on this was on 13B1B, improvements to existing development that are subject to AHJ approval. And that happens in a lot of locations. So we want to make sure we aren't, again, restricting things that are by right.
So what page was that on?
The first one is on 13B1B.
Right, so existing development. Tony, do you know of examples where existing development would be subject to SB 35?
Yeah, if there's a project where they're adding a building to a property that already has a building, or they're substantially modifying a building, it's probably rare, but it could happen.
Well, there's a couple of things here that maybe, like, I think there's one later on that talks about paint color or something that like wouldn't be subject to any sort of oversight. And so we just want to clarify that, just because a project is SB 35, if it is doing something that wouldn't be subject to the planning commission or whomever, that they're not obligated simply because they were originally approved under this.
Okay, that makes sense. So page 49 is next. 5B1, 70 to 80% opaque would be fine for equipment screening.
Yeah, and I think the board generally indicated agreement with that, but we just captured everything that was said at the last meeting since there were no motions or anything.
Right, okay, that seems fine. Same page, delete words after screening, after quote, screening shall be architecturally compatible. 5B.
Now, this is an interesting one because we just talked about this previously. This is the only place where compatible is used in a standard, and it therefore goes on to describe what that means or what that requirement is. So if we're striking that, I would highly recommend that we replace it with something. Because what this is saying is architecturally compatible, and that means matching paint, finish, trim, and the trim cap of the building.
Right, and so if we just leave it at screening shall be architecturally compatible, that's too vague.
Yeah.
You could just remove the words architecturally compatible and just say so match.
Yeah, the problem, Tony, is that the comment from last time was that the idea of matching is a little bit problematic for the board. And so how do you how do you get something that's compatible but not necessarily matchy-matchy? Technical term there, but
When again, compatible is subjective. So,
well, that's the point. That's the
Yeah.
point. You can't just strike this last part of the sentence without replacing it with something else that the board would want to see.
I have tried for a definition of compatible, it might work.
Oh,
Go
let's
for it.
go
So-
for
Compatible is where colors, shapes, sizes, and materials are frequently used together.
So if you were to do that with mechanical screening, I mean, the Combe Light building does that in that they have the Corten steel in other places, and then they use that for screening of the mechanical areas. If you have horizontal siding, you might have horizontal boards with spacing on your roof.
Is consistent a better word than compatible? Because then it suggests a reference with the building. Architecturally consistent.
Yeah, and I think actually Lynn's words, consistent to include, and it doesn't necessarily need to include everything
right.
in Lynn's list, but I think that's a good list of, if you might not need the same shape or size, obviously, depending on what it is. If it's a fence, it's not necessarily going to, but it might have the same colors or some of the same materials or the same texture.
If we just say screening shall be architecturally consistent, period. Is that?
Again, I think you need to describe what you mean by that.
I mean, consistent suggests the same, in line with
Used previously.
used
I think,
previously.
is in that word. That's definitely feels less vague than compatible.
What about consistent in color, shape, size, or materials? So if you use an or, it
Mhm.
means you can select among them, but you still need to select among
Mhm.
them. You can't just go off and do whatever.
Sure, yeah, that works.
so in this term, does consistent mean the same?
Color, shape, size, or material.
The same, then consistent, the same.
Yeah.
But that could be the same. You could have the wood siding that's naturally finished there is painted over there on the screening, right? It's like mix and matching is consistent.
Right.
So you have
with
a
the
palette
size,
that
yeah,
you're
yeah.
choosing from to make it architecturally consistent. Doesn't have to be exactly the same.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to read that back?
All
What you
right.
said?
Screening shall be architecturally consistent in color, shape, size, or materials.
That sounds good. You could say color, finish. You could put
Gary, can I
color.
interject there?
Finish or materials. Sorry, what was that, Stefan?
In order to make that statement objective, you would need to be clear about which one of those things are required. So it would have to be, you could have to make a
We're
statement like,
saying you need to choose one of those.
yeah, or to say at least one of the
At
following.
least one of, okay,
And it would need that language, yeah,
That's great.
perfect.
or two, however, whatever number you choose would be the objective part.
Right. Okay, then we have page 50, section 4AC. 4AC for allowed landscaping materials, decorative non-living landscaping materials, including but not limited to sand, stone, gravel, wood, or water, may be used to satisfy a maximum of 20% of the required landscaping area.
So my concern with this is that we're basically eliminating water risers or escaping options.
Well, you could have still water-wise landscape if it's but only 25%, and this is hardscape, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's, you know,
I mean, I get the more likely culprit of this is going to be somebody who just puts gravel everywhere and not the person who wants the xeriscaping,
right.
like beautiful desert garden. This is not my hill to die on.
Yeah, and I guess if you had a big, say, heritage oak tree and you had bark mulch underneath it, to me, that is covered by the tree for the full drip line of the tree. And that would be
Right.
considered covered by the plant. Because you can't plant things underneath
Right.
oaks. They won't live, as we all know, unless they're, but you don't want people putting irrigation on underneath oaks or some stuff like that either, generally. So.
Mhm.
So that's where you keep the heritage trees and you have the advantage of that it's part of your landscape plan.
I'm fine leaving this as is.
The question I have about all of these landscaping requirements in general is you make a landscaping requirement, but then what? Plants die, plants don't get watered, sprinkler systems break. Like how does this continue forward? It's plants are a lot less permanent than buildings.
Well, there's a maintenance
And I have my
section.
favorite example, which I won't bring up.
We know which one that is. Well, I mean, Carrie always brings this up, right? How do you enforce maintenance, right? There is a maintenance provision here, but
Well,
how
and then
do you-
the maintenance, the provision that's in here is subjective. So
that clean and healthy landscaping.
weeding, what's a weed, pruning, what's pruning, etc. So this is a difficulty
Yeah,
here.
this is a difficult one because the city frankly does not have strong standards and we would need standards elsewhere in our code, but we do have, there are certainly some removal of litter, or weeds. Weeds are things that weren't part of your planting plan. Pruning, if there are a lot of dead branches and dead debris and stuff, then that needs to come out. How you let it grow is up to you, whether you do the, hopefully you don't do the hedge
It seems
stripper
like
treatment, but
this
yeah.
seems ridiculous to me without some sort of enforcement. And I'm not boning in for enforcement because then we'd have to enforce ourselves, which we don't. And I'm just putting that out there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this document, and when there's too much stuff in the document, it distracts from really understanding what's important. I'd like to see this document be half this size than if we're going to adopt it. So that overall, just so it's more user-friendly and you're not just grinding through all these really specific standards that, quite frankly, the average person's not going to deal with. And these SB 35 projects are not going to be just your average Bob trying to build a building. They're going to be big corporations. But when we get to the SB 9, that is definitely going to be onerous for anybody trying to develop something, to try to weed through something like this, which we have coming up. So as a prequel to that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have a solution for this. I'm just bringing it up.
Yeah, we could strike maintenance, but
I'm not striking maintenance. I'm striking the whole thing. If we don't have maintenance, there's no point in having the rest of it.
well, I'm not happy with that because this is where we're going to put the heritage tree thing. This
Well, no,
is
the
also
heritage
talks
tree,
about
well, yeah,
the
so
retaining
minimize
walls.
it
This is-
down to a few. I mean, I'm not recommending striking it either. I don't know how to address this problem, but I'm bringing it up. I'm not saying I have a solution. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do have weed abatement and other kind of ordinances we can enforce on in the city that would refer to the maintenance part of it. I think the way most, if you think about Woodmark, the SB 35 and Petaluma Avenue Homes, Gravenstein Apartments, any of those sort of larger developments, and I'm not saying they went through SB 35, but they're run by nonprofit housing developments, Burbank Heights. They don't go around and kind of willy-nilly change their landscape. If they do start to do that, we usually hear about it as a city and they end up coming to us We heard about Burbank's Heights doing some landscape stuff. Turns out they're actually removing some stuff that the residents had put in, but
Oh, those nasty residents.
we need to,
They put their own thing in?
How dare they?
let's not digress. I apologize. But we end up hearing about things. And so technically, yes, if you do a major landscape revision like Grevenstein Apartments did on the north side of town, they came before us. They had some tree removals and then they had a landscape plan that we required. And they, as part of that.
Right, understood, and I'm all for it. I'm just wondering about how we manage the maintenance part of it. And what would be the best way to try to describe that so that it happens?
And we can put in some of our, like our weed abatement, ordinance, some of our existing municipal code references into this. They still need to, if it's a water efficient landscape ordinance subject site, they still, like Woodmark is, they still need to comply with that. They can't just go in and put in a whole bunch more water heads and change their landscaping out for non-drought tolerant species, for
Right.
instance.
And that's reviewed and approved by the city if it's a well-owned project.
Yep, and they have to certify it at the end that it was installed.
Right, but
per
you can do a
specs.
project where you say, I'm not doing any landscaping, just write that on your plans, and then it's not ever reviewed or enforced.
Right, but then underneath this, you would not be able to do that because you
Right.
wouldn't be, so you can't just
Right.
come in and do it
Yep.
later, and that's what this would prevent.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, that sounds good. I'm fine leaving that as is.
And I can see if we have any ordinance, like the weed abatement and some
We
other
can
other
reference
ordinances.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Page 51, section 3C, about retaining walls.
Page 51.
51, under retaining walls, design standards. 3C, include articulations such as buttress or pilasters if over 50 feet in length. Oh, and planter in front of the wall.
Right, and so the suggestion here was that the articulation line 3C wasn't necessary. I think that was
Is not necessary, you said?
correct.
I don't want to put a buttress on my retaining wall.
No. So if you have a retaining wall over 50 feet in length, it can be monolithic. It can be clean. Buttress free. But then does that whole set, then D and E stay in there, or?
Yeah, I think D is, Huntley Square is frankly a really good example of that, where they had the, whatever it was, 7 foot retaining wall right at the sidewalk. And they have 3B, they have 1 foot additional sidewalk, which is what our city engineer wanted. And so this would actually get that into our codes. And then D,
Yeah, there's
3D, they have a planter in front. So
Where was this?
this is a project that's approved on 7950 Bodega, where that sidewalk gap is across from the cemetery.
Okay.
It's not built yet, so
Yeah.
that's the one that's
So we
about to submit permits.
So we would just say include articulation if over 50 feet of length as follows, or
I think we're saying to strike it.
I think we just
strike
take out
C
C,
entirely.
take out
Yes,
C, and the rest of
okay.
it would still apply.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. It was just the end of the line there, C, made it sound like it was continuing on. Okay,
All right.
then page 57, 10-foot planter area, perhaps for 6 to 7 parking spaces instead of 5.
Right, and this was Board Member Bush's comment about just, it's a little strict to have 1 per every 5, and you end up having a bigger parking lot as a result. And so his suggestion was to have the 10-foot wide is better for a planting, and then have it be per, so you'd have more spaces before you needed to have this, but then it would also be a little bit bigger, and you wouldn't
Bigger,
end
yeah.
up with trees not being able to survive in them.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, page 60, discuss massing. Building on massing is, buildings on sloped design sites shall reflect the existing topography of the design site. That's the general comment. And then buildings with footprints 36 feet wide or less shall have a simple water table element or change of material between the basement and the ground floor, etc., etc. Was this your comment, Melissa? Discuss massing?
Yeah, it was section B. I felt like this is overly prescriptive.
What page?
Sorry, page 60. Item 7, massing, specifically B. Buildings with footprints wider than 36 feet and 2.5 stories or taller shall have a minimum of 1 story tall defined base. The base shall be defined through the use of one of the following methods: change of material, continuous horizontal band between the base and upper floors, and or use of a continuous shop front frontage. So for wider or taller buildings, it's sort of trying to give some articulation
Right,
to
and so
the
it's
facade.
distinguishing the first floor, that base,
Right.
from the upper floors.
I actually want to withdraw my objection to this.
Okay. And is one of them, so it's, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
of them.
Okay,
I'm okay with it.
all right. Then we're moving on to page 84. This is a photograph.
Yeah, that was a
Question.
reference to photographs, and which I think we've already discussed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what's the resolution to that?
Good question.
How are we fixing all these bad photos?
So I have a little bit of an issue in that you can't just go search photos on Google because they may be copyrighted. And I know you all are very busy. As Larry said, I could go take pictures, but I got a day job. If you have pictures that you would like, or if you know, like the architect for Keller Commons, get us the name and we'll try to get some pictures of it.
Mary
Mary
Dooley.
Dooley.
Her contact information says, which you probably have, but don't say in a public meeting because it'll be part of the public record. But if you get that to us, we can certainly try to get some of those pictures. And this is one where over time we can substitute in pictures as
Yeah.
people submit them to us. And that's again where I'm saying, with council, when it gets adopted, you just say, hey, we're going to continue to swap out pictures to make it more Sebastopol specific. And that may be Sonoma County design specific. So
Mhm. Okay.
So this example on 84, where do we have that in town? Where's our courtyard?
There's the Petaluma co-housing place
yeah, the
up on the
Petaluma
hill.
Avenue Homes is very
yeah.
much like this. And you just walk in the corner, I believe it's Walker and Petaluma, and there's sort of that walkway
I
that goes
thought
up the
I
hill.
thought there was a picture of that in here even, but maybe I was mistaken. But I think that's a good one for a courtyard building.
Yeah, and then there's not
Florence
quite like-
Florence Lofts.
Yeah, the Florence Lofts are a bit like this, and 2 Acre Woods is a bit like this as well. So there's a few of them around town.
Yeah, or Sequoia Village is the other co-housing on Covert.
I mean, can
Right.
our ask be of Opticos and their, I imagine they've got an image library that at the very least on each one of these pages, we have different styles noted in the 3 images per context. So for example, 84 is a good example. We've got this sort of mission look on the top 2 images, and then I don't even know what the bottom one's trying to be. But, can we please have differentiation? I was just on another page where we have these 2 little, well, actually, this is another one. So like 74, the bottom 2 images are pretty consistent. 72, the bottom 2 images are very consistent. And I think what we're trying to say in this is that, different styles are acceptable. I mean, yes, it would be amazing if they all came from Sebastopol and we're like, and look around town, we've got all this stuff. We don't have all of it. I get that.
Yeah.
But, at the very least, we can say that we're not looking for a matchy-matchy vibe throughout. We're looking for more variety.
And you mentioned Sonoma County, like why does it have to be Sonoma County? Like there's beautiful apartment buildings in Helsinki, Finland. That would be amazing if we could have them here. I'm dreaming. I mean, it's right. It doesn't
I don't
have
think we
to
have the
be-
budget to travel there to take the pictures. Is the problem.
Oh, okay, I'll work on that.
No, I was just thinking in terms of what, like, just in terms of describing to council the changes you might be making
Okay,
is just sort of the north, you could say North Bay,
North Bay.
Northern California,
yeah.
whatever
Okay,
you want.
got it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I do think it would be really helpful to get as many local examples in here. So you just gave a
Yes.
perfect example for the courtyard. So we've got, for example, the Florence, I guess the Florence lofts they're called. You know,
Yeah.
you could get a
Yeah,
picture
yeah.
of that in there. That's a good example, right? And I mean, because I just think it makes this more user friendly because this is like, these are buildings like on page 74. You're not going to see anything like that. Brick buildings.
That's in
I mean,
Petaluma.
that's not going to
maybe, but-
happen. So, I mean, it's just like not even relevant.
Mhm.
But I think if you were looking at this
Right.
and you saw something that you were familiar with, you would be enticed by it.
Yeah, I think Shelton's buildings, I can think of others that are courtyard buildings too. The Lighting Commons, the one that's
Right,
above
that's
behind the
true.
Basso building across from Rite Aid is also a little courtyard, much denser, taller courtyard building.
But see, the thing is,
Yeah.
you're using this term courtyard, so you've got other people looking at this document besides us, right? And then they can relate to that, right? Oh, this is a courtyard building. This is
Yeah.
what they mean,
Yeah,
right? And I know
Yeah.
these buildings.
right.
Yeah, so we can work on some local examples
Okay,
of that. I think.
great.
And again, that's something over time, but I think certainly if there are pages, and I think we just got, John, I don't know if you got the page references. In particular, as we're doing the building types, where people are kind of looking at them to make sure that we have the variety of samples there.
Okay, so if we move along, page 97, 4C, should only be required if entries are from street facades versus rear non-frontage areas. Sorry, 97, page 97. Or maybe it's actually, oh yeah, 97, pedestrian access. For item 4, letter C, upper floor units shall be accessed by a common entry along the front street.
So my thought with this was that if you had apartments upstairs and commercial core, couldn't you have a side entrance to the apartments that wasn't a public facing entrance?
Yeah, and I think
Lynn
I
says yes.
modified this to note if you're having it on the street facade so that you don't have like a bunch of doors, that they are grouped. If you're doing it on a street facade, then this would apply. If you're not, then that's fine. If you're on a side street or something.
You're talking about grouping the entries together rather than, okay, I get your intent now, but I do think the wordsmithing, yeah.
Mhm.
You don't want a series of porches. Okay.
Another drawback is with the front entries, you usually have a big window out there at your front, and you put a walkway and a railing in front of that, it really cuts down your view. And and I have not seen anything like that looked workable in Sebastopol.
You're referring to this?
Yeah, C. Mhm. I'd strike it.
So that's saying if there's upper floor units, you can only access them from the side or rear, or they're not a common entry necessarily.
I think that's a little problematic. Like I think about Main Street, the first block of Main Street north of Bodega. There are entries to apartments there, that make it much more accessible than if someone had to go through the back alley to get there. And I don't think, you know, just for accessibility reasons, I think you'd want to allow people to be able to have their frontage on the main street if that makes sense for them.
I think we're
So I
okay with
wouldn't strike
allowing it.
that.
We just don't want it to be required because right now, the way it's written now, it's like upper floor units shall be accessed by a common entry along the front street. So it doesn't give
Right.
us the
And so,
option.
yeah. So my rewrite of that was if entries to upper units are accessed along the front street, the street frontage, they shall be accessed by a common entry, something like that.
I think that works.
They don't have to be. They could be on
Yeah.
the side or in a courtyard on the rear.
Yeah,
Like Lighting Commons it's off the side street.
right.
Better.
Yeah. Okay. We go to page 124. Gallery, provide definition of gallery in definition section. So that's gallery is a whole page here of a sort of a frontage type, but it's not defined in the,
Yeah, there's sort of a
Such.
cross-reference between the two. And Tony, I think Singa had emailed or brought up a definition for it. But it feels like if there's a way to do gallery as a definition in the definitions, that'd be a little bit easier. Because they sort of reference each other a little bit.
Yeah, the reason we do that is the description here is actually intended as a definition, and in the definition section, we don't duplicate it just for the practice of not duplicating content when we can.
Can we add gallery there and then, do we have gallery in the definitions and then just reference the page where it's found?
well, what's wrong with the description that is on the page? It's a little more direct. That's what Tony's saying. Like the description here just finds what a gallery is. And the pictures show examples, including one in Sebastopol. I mean, that works for me. But yeah, I don't know that we
Okay.
need a definition if it's right there, if it's not going to
That's-
happen other places in the document.
Okay,
Right?
I'm not sure where that comment came from.
Okay.
So that's,
So the last one on this list, page 131, 132, about corner parcels or corner elements. Corner parcels. Buildings located at the intersection of at least two public rights of way shall incorporate at least one of the following features at the corner. Number one, a corner element. So that is, so subsection 7.050.7, is that a definition of corner elements? Or it's 7.
yeah, it's on the next page is what they
Right.
define as a corner element. Sorry.
That's not 100% clear to me. A corner element, see subsection 7.050.7. And the next page is a series of images, 7.050.A, architectural open space types. It's not actually corner elements on that next page. Or
Right, it's just on page 132, I believe. Is that correct, Tony?
no,
Just sort of the corner elements.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
And B is kind of the standards for it. And then there's the profiles kind of in the middle of the page.
Okay, sorry, I was looking ahead.
Item 8 is referring to the table that you've mentioned, Lars. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So is there any discussion? Discuss corner elements requirements.
And I think this might have been, is this true traditional? How do we want to require people to hold a corner? Are there other ways of doing it?
That was, I think.
Was the
part of-
context.
Mhm, I think you're right, yeah. Oh, so it's actually saying it shall use one of these three profiles below here. A little square pop out, angled pop out, or polygon pop out. Oh, octagonal, chamfer, and square.
Gonna add a round one.
Why can't you just have a corner?
Because it's not as articulated is what we're saying. That's what the
Yeah. Another thing is these corners look like they're crowding the corner. Seems like they'd be more comfortable on a main street set back a bit.
they're allowed at the intersection of two or more of the following. So does that mean they're not allowed elsewhere? I guess they're the two or more following public. So they're kind of, it's like in a significant setting, we want to make a more articulated corner is basically what it's saying.
Right, and so I actually just brought up, because I think I remember this from the design guideline subcommittee, what corner we were talking about. So I'm sharing that on the screen. This was kind of an example of how you might want to treat those corners. So
Mhm.
this is Sebastopol. This is the corner of Walker and Petaluma Avenue. And so that actually has
Oh,
on
okay.
both sides of it, but it's that compared to
A
this
parking
kind
lot.
of condition and not really wanting this condition.
Right.
If the site redevelops, how would you want it to be?
Well, we want it pushed to the sidewalk, certainly, which the other one is, right? But then it's the articulation of the corner that's being discussed here.
Right.
So if you go back
Right.
to the other one, right, it's a chamfered corner with a octagonal overhanging tower thing.
Yeah, this would be the diagram B in the page
Well,
opposite,
it's B and C.
or B and
It's
C.
chamfer at the
There you go.
ground floor, and then
Yeah.
we need Paul Fritz on this one because he did that building, I believe.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, the two back to back on Walker there.
Another option to consider is that instead of it just being a requirement at two intersections, is to say here are the intersections where we're going to require it and show that on the map on the design map.
Yeah, I almost wonder if might be, it's a little bit more prescriptive, but I'm wondering if it might be a better way of doing it. I mean, like, if someone were to develop this corner, you'd really hate for them to take out the tree necessarily to put in a corner element if they were, and you wouldn't require it, say this building purchased that building and wanted to go through, how would you want to require a corner element on both of those?
Does also require the owner to give back buildable space to the public way. I mean, a 6 foot by 6 foot space, but
Yeah, it's not a lot. It's, and could that be, I guess the question is, what we did take out was art sculpture and or fountain. And any sort of public seating area.
Yeah, there are three options on page 131, item 6. There are three options for how to address this requirement, and a corner element is just one of the three.
Right, and I will say we do have, I didn't want to make people dizzy, but I was sort of going through town a little bit. So here's another example. So this one has the rounded, which is what we were, is noted. They'll add the diagram for that. And then you have another chamfered. And here, I don't know if they're making this go through or not, but this is sort of you don't have that, and it's a little harder around the corner. This is actually a little bit of a pedestrian issue at this corner. And I don't know if that's because just of the one-way street, but we have heard from people that this is
Bad.
crosswalk is not a safe crosswalk.
Bad crosswalk.
If this was open, would that help? Because as pedestrians, you'd be able to see, and as vehicles, you may be able to see
Hmm.
back and forth. May help with some of that stuff. But, and yeah, so here's obviously an example of a planter, probably not the
Plaza.
most modern, but this is, yeah, the example of a plaza.
But so there's
in the
another
corner.
building, the bank right there. You know, that old bank has none of the protruding elements that is you're choosing from here. It's just a solid
Right.
corner. That's a
Right.
beautiful, you know, solid building.
And that has the angle, but I much prefer this building.
Right. That's the piece I'm sort of reacting to is like just because you have a corner doesn't mean you have to pop out this articulated element to make it a good building or a prominent corner.
That's my feeling exactly. Like that building is a beautiful building as it is. And the building across the street has the prescription and it's awful. So,
So it doesn't necessarily stop the bad design.
well, this is the issue that I have.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I'd be inclined to strike this. I mean, my note was quite prescriptive. Can we please leave it to quality architects to do quality work?
So we strike which part of it
I
or
think
all of it?
section 6 and 7.
And then 7 by default, which is that's
Yes.
just describing it.
Yeah, yeah. What do we
Mhm.
think? Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
See, 'cause
I'm okay with that.
the issue with architecture and even, you know, this form-based code and everything is there's a lot more involved than just the prescriptions. You know, like who's going to make something quality or not, and how you can't prescribe that.
The right code in the wrong hands is still going to be horrible.
I can tell you about a form-based code city called Worcester, Massachusetts. That's it's horrible. But at any rate, that's
Okay.
why I'm kind of like now that I'm realizing we're kind of trapped in here with this, start to minimize some of these
Minimize.
prescriptions. I mean, you got at some point you got to have faith and let it be understood. It's going to be the economic environment at the time, which we can't predict, is going to be a huge driver. Who's got money to build nice buildings and who's just doing utilitarian type buildings.
Mhm.
So
So we're voting, we're sort of agreeing to strike
right.
corner parcels, or sorry, which one?
Yeah.
6 and 7. Oh, Ted, you're right. This one, item 7.
Yeah, and I don't think this has a particularly strong connection to our discretionary design standards, which is one of the things I'm always kind of
Yeah,
thinking about as I'm
okay.
going through this. So.
So it is 6 and 7. Both are corner
Yeah.
parcels, corner elements. Okay, related. All right.
I think
well-
all of those corner elements, my personal opinion, that you just showed examples of, they're all 100% completely tacky, in my opinion. So, and then we have one building with no corner element that I think is beautiful. So, and
Yeah.
that's just me. Somebody else could come along and say just the opposite. So, I mean, how do you objectify this sort of thing?
Well, I think the fact that it doesn't necessarily stop the bad design, it doesn't need to be in here.
Right.
It maybe helps a little bit with sort of in a downtown walking around corners and whatnot, but I think, on the whole, it's, yeah, I'm fine striking it.
Okay.
We also have line of sight requirements, don't we, in downtown core, where like you have to be able to see through certain
That would back
corners?
the building away from the corner a little bit
Yeah.
anyway.
Traffic.
Yeah, we do, and obviously
Yeah.
some of these older buildings don't have that.
Sure.
so.
But anything new that wanted to have a corner might have to be set back a little bit. So you'd have the line of sight, which would relieve your corner.
Okay, so that's the list from the staff report. Are there any other specific comments to throw out,
Yes,
Melissa?
sorry. I'm going to have a lot. actually. Okay.
And for staff, Melissa, can you just include the page number so
Of
we
course.
can note it? Thank you.
Of course, yeah. I probably didn't do that last time. I won't go through all of the subject to AHJ because that's throughout. Y'all are doing that. And then, okay, so page 18, 2.0.40, we were going to add the map, and the map is still missing. Okay. I got the vehicles. Good. On page 48, screening, we had a lot of conversations about bushes and shrubs and art and sculpture and trees and et cetera. And I didn't have in my notes if we decided to leave it as is or if we were exploring further refinement. And apologies, I didn't write it down.
I have that we decided to leave it as it
As
was.
is? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And all of the fencing stuff matches our code anyway, so that's.
Sweet.
So I just have a clarification on the bushes in front of the house. So we have a restriction on the height of the bushes in front of our house. Is that something that's already in Sebastopol, or is this new in this code?
In terms of screening along frontages, we do actually, yeah.
What do you mean screening? Define screening. Screening your yard, screening it.
A whole bunch of bushes creating a hedge. A hedge is screening.
Okay,
A single plant is a single plant.
Okay.
It's not screening, it's a plant.
so this restriction on the height of the screening, is that already in our codes?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Oh, okay, so page 58, the maximum building height shall follow the existing topography. This is section 2, subsection A. And just identifying, and Carrie, I think you said there's something that codifies its midsection of the site to figure out where the height is taken from. There isn't? Oh, then we should codify that.
We have an image that we're going to include. So it's a straight vertical line from the grade up to whatever the building height is, if it's 30 feet, 35 feet, and it follows that grade line throughout the site. Yeah. I know that it's working with other architects. They have different opinions on if it's an average of the highest point to the lowest point, but for ours, it's a vertical line straight up as it follows the slope of the site.
Wherever you are on Earth. So if you have a site like this, your
Yeah.
height limit above is going to be that.
So that could be tough. I mean, a
Yep,
lot
it
of
means you have to design with the site.
cut and fill to get, okay.
No, it's natural grade. You can't just
No, I
build
know,
up to
I
then
know,
have
but
it
if
be-
you're,
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're, but then you have to like dig in to get your floor plan into the site so that this piece isn't, 15 feet above your maximum height on this piece. If it's going down, you're gonna be cutting.
Or you're going to end up with a stepped building.
I mean, you're gonna be cutting. You're not gonna have like a 1 foot deep piece of building that goes like this.
Right, but you also have the slope standards that talk about if you have the percentage of the site that can be modified in these standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear what the other architect on this board thinks of that, but I think that's not the way to do this.
Well, and I will say that's in our zoning ordinance. that
That's what I
height
was-
limit.
That's what I thought.
So that's not something made up just for these standards. That's being consistent with our zoning ordinance definition.
So a fight for another day. Okay.
A bigger fight. Mhm.
All right. But we are including a diagram, figure 1. Great. Page 59. There are still 2 periods after 5.a. Yeah, they didn't go through and make the edits, but they'll be doing that on the final.
Okay.
On page 64, I think it's helpful on section C to reference table 4.060.c. I think anywhere that we can make references to the circular nature of the document, that's helpful to somebody reading it fresh. And what was the reference you were?
Sure, yeah,
This is for.
It's, it's table 4.060.a,
Mhm.
subsection C, should reference table 4.060.c.
Got it. Okay.
Street trees.
Yeah. Which we're changing based on. Paul's
Yeah,
comment.
just to
Yeah.
eliminate
Okay.
that
Right,
frontage type we don't have. Cool. Yep.
Yeah.
That's cool. Oh, and then here's the thing that just like kind of fries me. I really do think that when we get to the shape and size of buildings and overhangs, and Lars, you mentioned this earlier, we need to allow for modern solutions that include zero eaves, zero overhangs. And there's references scattered throughout that need to be addressed to allow for that. And I don't know how to go through and mark up every single one.
Where's the first instance of that, Melissa?
Page 102 is probably the most overt. And then
Yeah, the references it in the architectural elements, page 140. That's where the overhangs and
130 also, section 5. It just doesn't include it as an option.
the uppermost portion of the building shall include at least one of the following.
Yep. It
Parapet.
sort of requires that articulation.
Mhm.
And then 138, did you mention this? Sorry if you mentioned this already. 138. I just have to insist that we get rid of the turret.
Yeah, you said it last time, right? The diagram,
That's the hill to die on. That's the turret to die
the
on.
turret.
I think I had comment on that one as well.
Well, or if it's in, it should have a definition of it. Just, I'm kidding.
That's a turret. And that's why it's there.
Yeah, anyway. Oh, and then, yeah, page 140, which you
Yeah.
brought up is, the
Yeah.
overt on the eaves.
Right, so 140 requires a 1 foot minimum. Where it's listed on the diagrams on 140. The standard is 141. That
Oh, thank you.
supporting element of the eave has to be 1 foot minimum, 8 foot minimum open.
So, and I think, and Tony, remind me, was this if you have an eave, then it needs to have this, as opposed to I'm not going to have an eave because of the various, whatever, the Steve shop.
Yeah, I think so. think Stefan's going to answer this.
Yeah, the way that that's set up, just to provide some clarity, is that if an eave is provided, then that's the minimum overhang. If it's a flat roof condition and there is no eave, then the standards for a parapet roof would apply. And you can see that the cap can be as little as 0 inches with as little as a 0-inch projection. So this is just providing guidance for when an eave is actually included in the design, it needs to meet those minimum standards.
Yeah, and I think the thing that came up earlier, and I'll just share the picture of the Florence Avenue loft structure, just because that's the
Yeah, it's not just a flat roof design that can have a a zero eave condition.
right. So here's a non-flat roof that has a 0 eave. So
Yeah, so the one that would apply to that is the closed rake section, which is the first diagram in number 5. And that shows a minimum dimension on the depth of the rake, but there is no required projection, which sort of followed what we understood the previous discussion to be.
Mm-hmm.
But just for the
It
record,
sounds- it sounds like
that you
this is-
showed should be possible and permitted under these standards.
yeah, I was going to say, I think we just need to clarify that, because I think this is like the second or third time we've had this discussion with this. It's just not being clear that you don't need to have an eave. It's not required. If you're going to have one, and that would be considered closed eave or no eave. And so I'm wondering if there's a way of adding a note to that table or something, or because it does make it sound, the way you read it, you sort of go, oh, well, if I have closed eave, then I have a 1 foot minimum. But closed eave, you're not thinking about it being 0, right? So where in here, if that's a closed eave, does it say I don't need to have
An overhang.
an overhang?
Yeah, we totally hear you, and maybe we can do that. But just at the beginning of the chapter, page 137, it says standards in this section apply to each architectural element wherever it appears. So to Stefan's point, if it doesn't appear, then you don't.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's
That's
probably just, maybe it's a
clarification.
note 2 even under that says, eaves are not required if no eave.
Maybe the applicability statements need to be moved to that page so that the reference is no longer required.
Yeah,
And then as a detail of sort of similar, the modern discussion on 141, if you have a supporting element on an open eave, it has a minimum height, but that would preclude using steel outriggers, for example. That can be really nice and only like 2 inches deep, not a 1 foot, 8 or 8 inch or 10 inch minimum.
This is another example that
Which
we discussed
Eve,
before.
It's page 141,
And it didn't get
number
changed.
7, Eve, and then under that it says height, supporting element, or it references the little diagram right above, that's letter I. So it's got this, cute little wood sculpted supporting outlook or outrigger, but that could be done in steel and it could be done a lot skinnier.
Question I have generally is, why are we even discussing what these eaves are going to be? Are we going to are we trying to mandate a specific form, or are we just going to, let it go to the architect? Why are we getting this specific?
Yeah, it's a good question. Tony and Stefan, maybe you can help us with this. I know when we went through the SB9 standards, you guys weren't here, but when we went through it, the question of having an open eave came up, and we actually said, plywood would be okay as long as it's not OSB. And I think, Paul actually had, it was Paul or you, Lars, that had a good way of doing that you can still use OSB on the, for the roof sheathing, but then when you do that last board, you switch to a nice, class.
I think
I
that's
forget
that's
the
common
class.
practice, I think. But the
Well,
question
just
that I
a lot
have
of
is
people-
why are we getting to this level
Yeah.
of authoritarian picking on what exactly we're going to do? It's a question that I have, because it doesn't allow things that somebody could come up with. And at some point in time, we're going to have to just let go and trust that we're going to have architects that are going to do something nice. I mean, we can't control it to this level of detail. It seems insane to me, frankly.
So if
I can agree with that,
respond?
that this is, just seems overkill, way too much control design-wise. And it's not that important of an element.
Stefan, sorry, you were trying to.
Sure. I mean, I do want to sort of acknowledge that these decisions that are made for objective standards, they really relate to the level of design control that you all are comfortable with. And so, there is sort of a avenue where you could lessen the design control. The way that we try to see this is that most likely in situations where design review or discretionary review would not be possible, these would be multi-story, multi-family buildings. And so we are looking at it through that lens of what sort of minimum level of depth and in the details do we want to introduce so that the building can have some degree of shadow lines, articulation, that would be where we can determine sort of that the outcome would be reasonable without anybody saying anything else about it. And these are not necessarily decisions that are always going to work for everybody. I think to the previous comment, an open rafter detail in steel could be done with a much narrower profile, and that could be acceptable and actually produce a really good building. But in the absence of discretionary review, we would ask if anyone puts anything up there at the eave in any configuration and it's only 2 inches, would it always be acceptable without discretionary review? So what this is presenting is just saying, well, actually, maybe no. Maybe what you need there is some additional depth to make sure that no matter what people put up at the top of the building, it has a reasonable depth that actually can be seen from the street and have some articulation. Again, I would sort of mention that all of these things they relate to sort of the amount of design control that you want to have, but it's seen through that lens of what are you going to be comfortable with if you actually don't have the ability to say anything about it?
But the question that I would add is, where do you stop? And I can think of an example of a rather attractive looking modern apartment building that was built on the off-ramp at Lakeville Highway. And it was quite attractive. And it's probably 5 years old. And now it looks terrible because all of the building materials, the paint and everything is just really low quality. So it looked nice at first. So do we start regulating like what type of paint so that it doesn't look bad in a couple years? Do we start regulating, all these other things that can make a building? I mean, this building looked quite, I thought, attractive 5 years ago, and and now it looks like poverty, to be quite honest. It's terrible. So, I mean, so the question I'm asking is, where do we stop? Like, how do we control all of this? If we're going to control it, like what? I mean, I think at some point in time, we're going to have some faith, and we are going to have these bad looking buildings. They're going to happen.
All right. On that note, so I don't know if there's anything else to go through in the document in front of us, and then we sort of have to have a discussion about what is next.
Do you have a few more?
Please, go ahead.
And actually, before we move on, so I just want to clarify, because it sounds like there might be a couple places where we just want to strike some language to make it a little bit simpler. So I don't know if I caught all of them, but I'm going to try to. So page 130, the requirements for the uppermost portion of the building, and so this is kind of that cap piece. Did you want to delete that? That was one of the sections that came up that were. And that's the uppermost portion of the building shall include at least one of the following: a parapet, a sloped roof with eave, and a rake. And we now know that that can be a sloped roof with no eave, or a cornice, which can be used in combination with a parapet or sloped roof.
I mean, I'm inclined to delete it.
So the uppermost portion of the building is not regulated, so to speak.
Yeah.
It should be consistent with the rest of the building.
But then you got to define what that is. That's then that's frankly what they're trying to do is,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
if we have to define everything, here's how we would define it.
Right.
We're basically including everything. Like, we're fine with everything.
In those examples there.
Well, if we add the like without Eve,
Right. You're basically,
then we're
well,
fine with everything.
what else? 'Cause
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
else could you finish the top of your building with?
So yeah, we can leave that
Just strike it.
Strike it.
or strike it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what are we striking, B or the entirety of 2?
Page 130, it is item 5, the uppermost portion of the building shall,
Item 2, it's item 2.5. 2,
sorry, yeah.
2B5.
Yes, 2B, number 5, all inclusive. And
And
then,
then 6.
6, because that is
Yeah.
referring to it.
Did you have, was there other questions you had on those, Carrie?
Yeah, so on page 141, I have that we were going to have a note saying that eaves aren't required to project. And I think that was, I think you might have had one other, Melissa, but I didn't catch
Turrets.
the page.
Turrets?
Kill the turrets.
I asked about that, and it is simply their diagram for
Get
the
a
different
better-
parts of a building. So yeah, maybe since there's a turret on this building, which is a little
Cute.
silly, frankly, maybe we can at least label it a turret, and then there's a reason it's there.
Although we understood the prior direction to remove the turret from the diagram. We just hadn't done it because we were going to go through and do that at the end with everything else.
Okay, I think I had asked about that, and it was like, well, this is just trying to define the different parts of a building. So it'd be better if we could remove the turret. Yeah, I think we're trying to get away from projecting that the only thing we're ever going to accept is the traditional building. And that would help greatly with that.
Okay.
I will say on page 139, it's actually a nice, attractive, modern building with horizontal windows. So that's.
Well, they had to have one. Okay.
Okay, so that's it. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. That's great. Page 129. I just wanted to make sure that item figure 7.040.1 has items A and D, and I wonder if that's supposed to be A and B, and I could see a question being asked by somebody in the future: are B and C omitted, or?
I see what you're saying. So the middle of the page 129, Tony Singay.
It should be labeled B instead of B.
Okay, great. Okay, and then we solved our issues with ease, which is awesome. Okay, 133. What about a cantilevered second story that creates sort of a public open space underneath it?
I think that would, so cantilevered roof, I think that would be under the main roof form.
Well, a cantilevered second story, so that, instead of having columns to create an arcade, we actually just cantilever the second story of the building.
And you're on page 133?
Yep.
Architectural open space types.
Oh, instead of the arched openings, just a cantilevered. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
can we have a cleaner solution so we're not requiring to create this sort of formal arcade, but it just creates a implication of public space?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of a building I used to live next to it, Berkeley at Hearst and Shattuck, on the opposite corner from, if it's Richard Furneaux's, the structural engineering building. I can bring it up here. It actually had a very nice steel and glass.
Yeah, it can
Overhang.
be lovely.
And I'm not sure how you would define that. I can bring up the picture, but I think Tony, the question is, can we add that to these types?
Yeah, I think so.
Sweet.
And an open space that is created underneath or below a architectural projection
Yeah.
that's not supported by any columns.
Basically, it doesn't require a fourth wall definition with post and beam or columns of any type. It just exists in space. Page 134, I thought in our last conversation, we also decided to omit mahogany, and I wasn't sure if we did.
We did because of sustainability reasons.
I thought so, okay. And then I had a note in here about adding copper as an additional metal for 2.b under durability. If anyone really wants to spend that kind of money, but
Right, we did talk about that. Yeah.
I think we did, and did we decide it was ferrous or not? I think Tony actually chimed in on this one.
De Young is that, oh, okay.
Why?
Copper is not ferrous, though, is it? Is it ferrous? Tony, do you remember this discussion?
It's not ferrous.
No.
So the use of copper, it does not apply to the standard. This is only steel and related ferrous metals.
Oh, I
Things
see.
you learn
Exterior
every
thing.
day. Okay,
So you're free to use copper.
Right.
excellent. All right, and then I'm gonna turn is fine. 0E we talked about. I think that might be it for me. Okay. I'm done.
Good. All right. Thank you. So any other last comments on the draft specifically? Christine or Lynn? No? Christine?
I think I've seen enough for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did we all agree on the retitling of the document, though? I don't know if we got formal sign off on that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I agree.
I think I heard folks fine with that.
Okay.
It was, I mean, we can certainly.
As objective design standards for HAA projects, basically.
Yeah, or it could be for ministerial review That's a little bit of a mouthful. We can explain in the admin that is only for, yeah,
Okay.
Or projects subject to the
SB
housing.
35 projects is maybe
okay.
the right title for it.
Right. Okay.
I think
great.
having that HAA in the title though will
Is-
protect us should the city council be like, hey, this is so great, let's do this for every project ever. And then we
Yeah,
all
and
just show up and say, no.
I will say it would be helpful if the chair or maybe the chair and vice chair could be at the council meeting when they
Sure.
do review this in case
Sure.
they have questions.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think if that question comes up, I think you're both very opinionated.
Articulate.
Able to
she
speak
was
to that.
gonna
Yeah,
say
thank you. I was going to
articulate.
say articulate. And now I'm not articulating well because
Okay, so it sounds like we've gone through it thoroughly once more. So I guess what would be the next step? So we do have two members not here. One who I think always has good comments, thorough landscape comments in particular. I don't know if we can have his comments sent or as a follow-up somehow. And then we've brought up, Christine's brought up sort of bigger picture questions, but I don't know that are we agreeing to sort of put those off into the future of continuing to work on this living document?
Well, I think first of all, we put everything together and Carrie's comments, and we have one more draft to look at. And I think we have time for that.
Yep.
So what I would say in that is that I've made comments. These guys aren't going to do another round draft for us, I don't think, for us to look at and then do another draft for council. I can share the marked up draft because I've actually been taking notes on all of our comments today, plus the red lines that they have. And we could scan that. I know I've got some chicken scratch, but I can kind of white out and clean it up if I need to. So we could go through and do another, or I could put them into sort of the red line, the PDF, which is the red line version, essentially, if you wanted to look at it.
I would like to have access of one more draft. If it's
So that's what it would be. It would be a
if it's
red
marked
line
up, that's
marked up.
fine. But
Okay.
I would like to have it.
Yeah, it seems like there's been enough changes and comments it would be worth
Yeah.
doing.
To see it.
And then I guess
Then I would say continue it to, if you want to see it again, if you continue it to your regular meeting this month, then that will still put us on track to
Mhm.
get it, probably the first meeting in November to council,
okay.
or the second,
Uh-huh.
either the second in October. That's also possible, actually. I think we can switch that around because we've got.
What
items on
is the
both
date? What is
agendas.
that date, the 2nd in October?
October 17th, I
Okay.
believe. I just told someone that, but let me
So,
check.
so we would,
Yeah, so it'd be
so we'd
Going-
continue it to the 26th of September.
correct.
of
I'm not going
our
to
next
be here on the
meeting.
26th, so I'd like to not have it be that date.
So then it would go to the 24th of October unless we schedule a special meeting.
But we talked about the 17th. What about that date?
That's a city
That was a
council
council
meeting.
meeting.
That was
Oh,
to get
okay.
it to city
Oh,
council
okay.
in a timely fashion.
So
Yeah.
there's also the mention at the beginning that the planning commission would want to see this again, depending what we said. Right.
So I think, so that was mainly Vice Chair Fritz. And we can certainly talk to him and let him know what the changes are or share the draft when they
Okay.
get it. I think what you guys have said, I don't see Paul having a lot of issues with. I think it's pretty much in the direction he was going.
Okay. So now it sounds like we're having a scheduling issue of when the DRB can all meet again and review the next draft.
And Carrie, how long do you need to get a draft together? A couple weeks.
Yeah, probably through next Wednesday, I would say,
Okay.
probably.
That's quick.
I mean, because I'm not rewriting it, I'm just
She's just
Mhm.
been
marking
Just
it
marking it
up
up,
with
yeah.
red lines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, is this something where we can look at the draft that gets emailed out to us and then maybe we can say, yeah, we think we need another review. To
Formal-
get-
a
So the
formal
chair and
review.
vice chair could do that. Can't do it with all committee members. That's a
Okay.
Brown Act violation. Fair
Well, we
enough?
can't do it together, but if each of us has a draft to review,
You can individually let me know, and then
Right.
the chair and vice chair can make the decision on that together with staff. Because that's not a quorum. That's less than a quorum.
Right. No, I think what I'm suggesting is we each, like we do in any meeting, we get material, we review it separately, we come back to the meeting ready to vote on it. And if someone can't be here, they could send comments individually to Carrie that could still be incorporated, but we don't, instead of trying to schedule a special meeting that everyone can make, which is sounding like it can't happen.
But we have to have a meeting where we vote.
That's correct, but not everyone has to be here. We just have to have a quorum.
So, yeah, right, because we know, I mean, I think part of it was wanting to see the draft again, was part of it was making sure there weren't more landscape comments from Member Bush. So I'm just kind of looking at how we might do that. So let me just go through so generally we have city meetings here on Tuesdays. So I'm just want to kind of see if there is a Tuesday for a special meeting that would work for folks similar to today. That gives us enough time for us to get the draft out and you all to review the draft. So would October 3rd, and obviously we don't have Carrie or Marshall here, but at least with this group, we can kind of see, are there dates we can potentially suggest?
Yeah, I'm out of town the 26th through the 12th of October.
Okay, does the 17th work?
17th works for me.
October 17th?
Okay, so we could have so we would schedule a special meeting of the DRB to meet here on the 17th.
Right, so that would be, yeah, so it's the same as today, where
Today.
there's this council meeting.
Right.
We'll need to check with the city clerk to make sure they're not starting their meeting early. I don't believe they are for any reason that I know about, so.
Okay.
So I believe that should work if we do the same kind of thing.
So if we do it on the 17th and it moves ahead, it can get on a council meeting in November.
For that November 7th still, yeah, which is, they have a meeting the 21st. I'm out of town that week. And then the next one would be the 5th of December, and I'd prefer not to leave it that late if we can, so.
So not to put pressure on you, Carrie, but do you think you can get your marked up draft, this last one to look at before September 26th out? So
Yes,
I have a copy.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be a problem, but
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
Okay.
can review it before you're traveling.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm going to shoot by the end of next week to get it out to y'all, so.
great.
that's-
Okay. So
I'll
October
put information.
October 17th is our tentative to review this. Right, October 17th is tentatively when we'll meet
Correct,
again
yes,
to
yes.
go over this. And then we have
Yep.
do we still have a meeting on the 26th? Yeah, okay.
Car wash,
So we need a motion. We need a motion.
car wash on the 26th.
Anybody want to craft a motion to continue?
So we would just be,
Can I just make the motion and,
Yeah.
or state the
Well, yeah.
language, and whoever wants to move can
Then I'll
so
raise my
move?
hand,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Go for
So,
it.
so the motion would be to continue review of the objective design standards for HHA/SB 35 eligible projects to the October 17th special meeting of the DRB. And that would be subject to, if we get the draft out and everyone says, hey, I don't need to talk about it again, then we can always cancel that. But otherwise, it would be October 17th.
Anybody want to adopt that motion?
I'll adopt it.
Okay. And,
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
okay, and one point of discussion,
One
just
point
to
of discussion.
clarify for the record. If everyone is fine with it, we could schedule it then for a vote on the resolution September 26th. So once the draft comes out, if you email me and say, oh yeah, I got to talk about it again, then we'll keep the 17th. If I hear back from everyone says, Yeah, I think we're good with this. Then we'll go ahead and schedule it for the September 26th.
Okay.
Just don't reply all.
Just don't
Don't
reply.
reply
all.
all, that's right. Okay. Sure. That sounds fine.
All right, so there's the motion.
Can we call a vote?
Lynn Diebler,
Aye.
Chair Langberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hanley,
Aye.
and Christine Lovell.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes with 2 absence of Marshall Balfe and Carrie Bush.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I think that's,
And I'm going to
Brings it-
suggest we probably don't need Opticos at that meeting.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
So we'll just go through and see if there's any final edits.
Yep.
Excellent.
But thank
Thank
you, Opticos team, once again for being here with us and helping us through it all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped.
Thank you.